Hello everyone, tonight I've got 10 special scary stories for all of you. I know many of you watch these videos to fall asleep, so before that, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Creepy Sinister, and don't forget to comment below and tell me where you're from and what time you're watching. Now get comfortable and let's begin. It was the first Uber ride home from the airport after a delayed red-eye I spent completely alone. I thought the silence would be peaceful, until I realized it wasn't silence at all. The kind of quiet you get at 1 in the morning isn't relaxing when you're exhausted and stuck under bright airport lights. It feels like the world is holding its breath. Phoenix Sky Harbor was still awake, but only in the way a vending machine is awake, humming and blinking, pretending there's life inside. My flight had been delayed twice, then sat on the runway like the plane forgot why it was there. By the time we landed, I felt half asleep standing up. I grabbed my bag, followed the stream of people to baggage claim, then to the rideshare curb outside Terminal 4. The air was warm even at night, that dry desert heat that makes your skin feel dusty. Cars rolled up, brake lights glowing red, drivers leaning out windows calling names like they were reading off a list for a secret club. I ordered an Uber and the app gave me a gray sedan with a driver named Raymai. His profile photo was kind of blurry, like it had been taken through a foggy window. The car pulled up fast, like he'd been waiting right around the corner, and he rolled down the passenger window. He said my name in a quiet voice, more like a question than a greeting. I nodded, checked the license plate, and it matched what the app said, so I climbed in. The inside smelled like some strong air freshener trying to cover something else. The seats were clean, but the car felt lived in, like he basically spent his life in it. A phone was mounted on the dash with the Uber app open, the route already loaded. Another phone sat in the cup holder with a dark screen. Raymai kept glancing at the dash screen like it was showing him something embarrassing. We pulled away from the curb, merging into the loop that snakes around the airport. I rested my head back and watched the blur of signs and palm trees pass by. I could have fallen asleep right there if my body would have allowed it. I'd been up since the previous afternoon, living on coffee and airport snacks, and the idea of my bed felt like a promise. The app said the ride would be just under half an hour to my apartment on the north side of the city. We hadn't even reached the first exit when Raymai cleared his throat and said, "Sorry, GPS, been acting weird tonight." He chuckled once like he wanted me to laugh with him, but it didn't come out right. I gave a tired little okay and stared at the map. The blue line on the screen looked normal, pointing toward the freeway. The estimated arrival time stayed steady, like nothing was wrong. Then the route on the screen jumped. It didn't fade or smoothly update. It snapped like someone had yanked the line with their finger. The blue path shifted off the freeway ramp and onto a surface street, cutting through a maze of smaller roads. A tiny message flashed on the bottom, "Finding faster route." Raymai sighed and shook his head like a dad annoyed at a misbehaving kid. "See, it does that," he said. "It keeps recalculating. I don't know why." I leaned forward a little, more awake now. We were still close enough to the airport that it didn't feel scary, just annoying. Phoenix has detours and construction everywhere, and sometimes GPS really does get confused. But something about how often the line shifted made my skin tight. Every couple of minutes the app would update, and each new route seemed to peel us farther away from the freeway, like we were slowly being pulled off a main road and into the side streets. Raymai kept apologizing. He said it like he'd rehearsed it. "Sorry about this, my bad, I swear it's the GPS." And every time he said it, his eyes would flick to the rearview mirror, catching mine for just a second. Not like he was checking if I was okay, more like he was checking if I believed him. I pulled out my own phone and opened the Uber app, the live map with our little car icon moving along. It matched his screen. It showed us heading in the right general direction, still labeled toward destination. The estimated arrival stayed in the same range, sometimes even dropping by a minute like we were making progress. But the streets we were actually on didn't feel like progress. The airport glow faded behind us and the road got darker. Streetlights were spaced farther apart and the buildings turned from terminals and hotels to low warehouses and fenced lots. Chain-link fences went on forever, the kind topped with barbed wire. The sidewalks looked empty, like nobody walked here because there was no reason to. My phone buzzed with a tiny notification. "Your driver is on the fastest route." I remember thinking, fastest route to where, exactly? At a red light, I looked up at a street sign. It was a name I didn't recognize, and I'd lived in Phoenix for almost 3 years. That didn't automatically mean anything, but it was another little pinch in my stomach. Raymai's hand stayed tight on the wheel even when we were stopped. He kept tapping his thumb against the steering wheel, fast and nervous, like he was counting down to something. The route updated again, and this time it wanted him to turn left into an even darker stretch of road, away from any other cars. Raymai didn't hesitate. He just turned like the app was the final word. The sedan's headlights swept across a long fence and a row of abandoned-looking loading docks. The street was so quiet I could hear the tires rolling over the rough pavement. Are you sure this is right? I asked, trying to keep it casual. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I also didn't want to sound like an easy target. Raymai made a small noise in his throat, like he was trying to swallow a bad taste. It says it's faster. It keeps doing this. I'm sorry. He said it again, I'm sorry, but his voice didn't sound sorry. It sounded careful, like he was reading a line that mattered. I watched the map on my phone. The little car icon kept moving and the line still pointed forward, still promising that we were getting closer. But when I zoomed out, my heart dropped a little. We were drifting away from the thick, clean lines of the freeway and into a blank area where the map showed less detail. It wasn't empty exactly. It just looked ignored, like a part of the city the app didn't know how to describe. I tried to refresh my app, thinking maybe it was lagging. It spun, then froze for a second, then came back like nothing happened. The arrival time now said we'd be there in 27 minutes, even though it had said 25 minutes almost 10 minutes earlier. That didn't make sense, not unless we were taking the long way, and we definitely were. Another route recalculation. This one nudged us onto a road that didn't even have a painted center line anymore. It wasn't dirt, but it was cracked and patched like it hadn't been cared for in years. The car's suspension felt every bump. I glanced out the window and saw scrubby desert plants pushing through the edges of the pavement. It didn't feel like a normal neighborhood. It felt like a space in between places. I sat up straighter. Hey, can we just get on the freeway? I asked, forcing a small laugh like it was a normal request. I don't care if it's slower. Raymai didn't answer right away. He stared forward like he hadn't heard me. Then he nodded once, too quickly. Yeah, of course, the GPS. He trailed off and cleared his throat. It keeps trying to do this. I don't like it either. But he didn't turn around. He didn't pull over. He didn't make any move to correct it. He just kept following the blue line. The air in the car started to feel warmer, even though the vents were blowing. The smell of the air freshener got stronger, sharp and chemical. My tiredness was gone now. It was replaced by that alert, trapped feeling you get when your body decides something isn't right before your brain can explain it. We passed under a broken streetlight, and for a second the car went completely dark. In that moment I heard something soft from the front seat, a vibration like another phone buzzing. The second phone in the cup holder lit up, and I caught a glimpse of the screen before Raymai covered it with his hand. It was Uber. It was some other map, darker, with fewer details, and the message on it looked like a notification, a short line of text. I only saw 2 words clearly. Keep going. My throat went dry. I stared at the back of his head, then at the door handle, then at the window. My mind did that thing where it tries to list options fast, like it's flipping through an emergency manual. Ask him to stop, call someone, record, get out at a light, but there weren't any lights, no intersections with other cars. Just this empty road stretching ahead and the desert creeping closer on both sides. I tried to call my friend Josh, the one who lived a few buildings down from me. My phone rang once, then cut to silence. No voicemail, no message. I looked at my signal, 1 bar, then none. I turned off Wi-Fi, then turned it back on like that mattered. The app still showed the ride, still updating, still insisting we were headed the right way. Raymai whispered almost to himself, come on, come on. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my chest hurt. I forced myself to speak. Pull over, I said. My voice came out calmer than I felt. I'm getting carsick. I need a second. Raymai's shoulders tensed. He shook his head slightly. Not safe here, he said, still not looking at me. I'll pull over when we get back to the main road. What main road? I asked, and I immediately hated the edge in my voice, because now it sounded like fear, and fear changes how people treat you. His jaw clenched. He exhaled through his nose. The freeway, I'm trying. But he wasn't trying. The map on his dash updated again, and again it chose a route that cut deeper into nothing. The street names stopped sounding like normal Phoenix streets. They sounded like they belonged to service roads, access paths, places meant for trucks and utility workers. We passed a sign that said authorized vehicles only, and Raymai drove right past it like it didn't apply to him. At that point I reached for the door handle just to test it. It didn't open, not because it was locked with a normal click. It felt dead, like the handle wasn't connected to anything. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I was falling. I tried again, harder, nothing. Child lock. I stared at the door, then at the window, and the image in my head was so clear it made me dizzy. Me smashing glass, trying to crawl out while the car keeps moving. I didn't have anything heavy, just my phone and my backpack. My backpack had my laptop, my charger, nothing helpful. I looked at the front passenger door lock. The little switch was down, locked. Raymai noticed me moving. His eyes flicked to the mirror again. This time he held my gaze for a full second, and the look on his face was not confusion. It was flat, like he'd made a decision and didn't want to talk about it. Please don't do that, he said quietly. That sentence hit me harder than yelling would have, because it meant he knew. He knew exactly what I was trying to do, and he was telling me not to. My hands started shaking. I tried to stay smart. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. I opened the Uber app and tried to hit the safety button. The little shield icon. My thumb hovered for a second, then pressed it. The screen loaded and a message popped up saying, "Something went wrong. Try again." I hit it again, same message. I tried to end the trip. The cancel option was there, but when I pressed it, nothing happened. It just highlighted for a second and went back, like the button was fake. I stared at my phone, blinking hard, like maybe I was too tired and seeing things wrong. But it was real. The app was acting like it wanted to help me while refusing to do anything at all. Raymai took a turn that made my stomach twist. The car climbed a slight hill, then dipped into a stretch where the road narrowed and the streetlights vanished completely. It was just our headlights now, cutting through the darkness. On the right, I could see the outline of a long wash, dry and rocky. On the left, a fence ran parallel to us, higher than the car, with black plastic slats woven through it so you couldn't see inside. The route recalculated again, and the dash screen made a soft chime. Raymai let out a breath, almost like relief. "We're almost there," he said. I looked down at my phone. My destination marker was still my apartment address, but the little pin on the map wasn't sitting on a normal street anymore. It was sitting in the middle of a blank space. No building outlines, no business names, no street grid, just the pin floating over emptiness like the app was guessing. "We're not almost there," I said. I couldn't keep my voice calm now. "This isn't right, let me out." Raymai tightened his grip on the wheel. "It says we're close," he replied, and his tone sounded almost annoyed, like I was being difficult. "This happens. The app is weird." Then his other phone buzzed again, louder this time. He didn't cover it fast enough. I saw the screen clearly in the reflection off the windshield. A dark map, a small dot, and another message. "Turn off headlights." I felt my whole body go cold. For a second, I couldn't move. My brain refused to accept it because it was too insane to be happening in a real car, in a real city, with my real name on the trip. Then Raymai's hand moved toward the headlight knob. I snapped. I leaned forward and grabbed his wrist with both hands hard. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, don't do that." The car swerved slightly and Raymai jerked his arm away. He looked at me for the first time fully, his eyes wide now, not with fear but with anger. "Don't touch me," he hissed. In that moment, I saw something else on the dash screen that made my heart stop. The Uber app on his mounted phone, the one that was supposed to show my destination, suddenly changed. Not the route, the actual address. It flickered like the text refreshed, and my home address was replaced by something else. A set of numbers and letters. No street name, no city, just coordinates. Raymai stared at them, and his face went tight like he was trying to understand what he was seeing. For the first time, he looked confused, truly confused, like the plan had shifted without his permission. He whispered, "No, that's not." Then, without warning, the car turned onto a rough gravel path that wasn't even a real road. The tires crunched loud, and the sedan bounced slightly as we drove between two sections of fencing. Ahead, I saw a gate standing open. Not a normal gate for a neighborhood. A wide metal gate like you'd see for a private yard or an industrial lot. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I almost threw it from the shock. A notification filled the screen. "Trip complete, thanks for riding." I stared at it like my eyes weren't working. We were still moving. We were nowhere near my apartment, but the app acted like the ride had ended. The map disappeared. The driver's name vanished from the top. And then my screen showed the payment summary like it was the most normal thing in the world. Raymai slowed down. The gravel path ended in a wide, empty lot surrounded by fencing on all sides. In the distance, a single building sat low and dark, with one bright light over a door. The rest of the lot was empty except for a few rusted shipping containers lined up like giant metal coffins. The air outside the car looked thick with heat even in the dark, like the desert was breathing. Raymai stopped the car, and for a second neither of us moved. The only sound was the engine idling and the faint hiss of the vents. Then the locks clicked. All of them. I didn't wait to understand why. I yanked my door handle again, and this time it opened. I shoved the door wide and stumbled out, almost falling onto the gravel. I grabbed my backpack, half expecting Raymai to grab me, but he didn't. He stayed in his seat, staring straight ahead like his brain was still catching up. I ran, not toward the lit door, not toward the containers. I ran along the fence line, searching for anything that looked like an exit, any gap, any weak spot. My shoes slipped on the loose gravel, and my backpack bounced against my spine. Behind me, I heard the car door open, then close. I didn't look back, I just ran faster. My phone screen lit up again in my hand, not because of signal returning, but because of another notification. New route found. I tripped when I saw that, caught myself, and finally risked a glance back. Raymai's car headlights were still on, but the sedan wasn't moving. He stood outside his driver's door watching me. He didn't chase, he didn't call out, he just watched like he was waiting for something else to happen next. I found a section of the fence where the slats were missing, and I could see the desert beyond it, open and uneven. I jammed my fingers into the chain links and pulled until my hands burned. The fence didn't budge. I ran along it, desperate, until I saw a metal post with a padlock and a thinner strip of fencing attached, like a service gate. It wasn't open, but the bottom edge lifted slightly, like it didn't sit flush against the ground. I dropped to my knees and shoved my backpack through first, then pressed my shoulders down and forced myself under the gap. The chain link scraped my back through my shirt, and sharp gravel bit into my palms. For a second I was stuck, the fence pressing into my spine, and I thought, this is it. He's going to grab my ankle. But no hands grabbed me. I wriggled free, grabbed my backpack, and ran into the desert. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like forever, but it was probably only minutes. The ground was uneven, full of rocks and dry brush, and my lungs felt like they were tearing. Eventually I saw distant lights, a road, and the outline of a gas station sign glowing in the dark. I stumbled toward it like it was the only real thing left in the world. When I reached the pavement, I finally got signal back. My phone flooded with delayed notifications all at once. I called 911 with shaking fingers, trying to explain where I was without even knowing where I was. I told them I'd been taken off route in an Uber and dropped somewhere fenced in. The dispatcher asked for landmarks, and all I could say was desert and containers and one light on a door. It sounded ridiculous even to me. A police car showed up after a while, lights washing the empty road in blue and red. The officer asked for my phone, looked at my Uber history, and frowned. He asked what the driver's name was again, and I told him. He tried to pull it up on his own device and got nothing. The trip in my history showed a pickup at Phoenix Sky Harbor, then a drop-off location labeled unknown, with a blank map thumbnail like the app had erased the entire ride. The officer's voice stayed calm, but his eyes kept narrowing at my screen. He said something like, "We'll take a report, and we'll check the area," the usual phrases that sound helpful but don't promise anything. When I asked if they could track the driver, he said rideshare companies don't always cooperate fast, and that they'd request records. It felt like hearing my fear translated into paperwork. Later that morning, after a friend finally came to get me, I went home and sat on my couch without even turning on the lights. My apartment felt different, like it wasn't automatically safe just because it was mine. I kept opening the Uber app, refreshing the trip history, trying to make it make sense. Each time the same blank drop-off, the same unknown, no route line, no map. Like the whole thing had been a dream the app refused to acknowledge. I reported it to Uber through their help chat, and I got a generic response about investigating. I never got a real person on the phone. The driver profile never appeared again. The next day, the trip disappeared from my history completely, like it had been deleted. If I hadn't taken a screenshot of the payment summary, I wouldn't have had proof it happened at all. The screenshot became the part I couldn't stop staring at. Under the fare breakdown, where it normally says the pickup and drop-off addresses, my pickup was listed normally as Phoenix Sky Harbor Terminal 4, but the drop-off line was unknown on the screenshot. It was a set of coordinates. And underneath that, in smaller text, like a note the app added for itself, it said, "Saved place." I didn't sleep much after that. For weeks, every time my phone suggested directions home, I'd feel my stomach tighten. Sometimes, when I opened my Maps app without typing anything, it would autofill a recent destination I didn't recognize. I'd close it fast, like I could shut the memory away by force. Then one night, almost a month later, I was at my kitchen table scrolling through my phone when a push notification slid across the top of my screen. It was from the Maps app. "Time to leave," it said. And underneath it showed a route already loaded to those same coordinates. Back in downtown Miami, I worked the night shift at a gas station. I used to think the scariest thing I'd see was a drunk customer. I was wrong. I was 22 at the time, and I'd taken the job because it paid a little more for nights. The store sat off a bright main road, but after midnight the traffic dried up and the whole place felt like a lit-up box surrounded by darkness. I'd learned to read people fast. The ones who avoided eye contact, the ones who looked too long at the register, and the ones who wandered instead of buying something. After a few months, I thought I'd seen every type of weird. Most nights were just boredom and bad coffee. I'd do the same routine, wipe down the counters, restock the cooler, and scroll on my phone between customers. Around 2 a.m., the same handful of people always came in. A hospital worker grabbing an energy drink, a rideshare driver buying gum, and a guy in paint-stained shorts who never spoke. I remember thinking the city had patterns, like it ran on rails, and if you stayed in your lane, nothing would touch you. I quit that job after about a year, got a better one, and started renting a small place closer to Brick Hill. It felt like moving up in the world. I was still careful, still the type to lock my doors twice, but I stopped feeling like danger could just walk in whenever it wanted. Miami had its rough moments, sure, but I told myself I wasn't naive anymore. I was smart, and I didn't do dumb things like get into strangers' cars without checking the plate. That night, I wasn't planning to be out late. I'd worked a long shift at my new job, then met a friend for a quick drink, and by the time we said goodbye, my feet hurt and my head felt heavy. I remember stepping into the downtown high-rise where I lived and feeling that relief you get when you're finally home. The lobby smelled like someone's expensive candle, and the doorman gave me the tired little nod like we were both surviving the same city. My building's parking garage was underground, and the elevators took you down to level B. It always echoed down there, like every sound had too much space to bounce around in. The concrete pillars had faded paint markings, and the fluorescent lights never felt bright enough. Even in a nice building, the garage had that same cold, stale air, like it belonged to something older than the condo above it. I didn't drive that night, so I opened my rideshare app while I waited by the elevator doors. My phone showed I had a solid rating, something like 4.97, and I remember feeling a tiny, stupid pride about it. The app pinned my pickup spot automatically right outside the elevator entrance on level B. I watched the little car icon on the screen move closer, and when it stopped, my phone buzzed with the "Your ride is here" notification. A black SUV rolled into view and stopped right where the app said it would. The headlights washed over the concrete in front of me, and for a second I couldn't see inside. Then the window came down and the driver leaned slightly toward me. He didn't smile, but his voice was friendly in that practiced way. He said Marisol Vega. That part didn't scare me. Drivers asked my name all the time, and hearing it was normal. I nodded and stepped closer, just enough to glance at his plate. It matched. The app photo showed a guy with short, dark hair and a neat beard, and the driver looked close enough to pass, especially in the garage lighting. I opened the back door and slid in, and the second I shut it, he said like he was continuing a conversation, 4.97, nice. Most people around here sit at 4.8 something. I froze for a second, the way you do when something doesn't fit. I gave a small laugh because that's what you do when you're trying to keep things normal. Thanks. I said, even though I didn't understand why he was telling me that. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, not like a quick check, but like he was watching my reaction. Then he added, the last 3 pickups were the Publix on Biscayne, Miami International, and what was it, that little bar off Southwest 8th. My stomach tightened so fast it almost made me nauseous. Those were real, Publix 2 days ago. The airport when I picked up my cousin last week. The bar, the one my friend loved, where we'd met up right before I came home tonight. I hadn't told him any of that. He couldn't have guessed it unless he'd been watching me for days, and that was worse than anything. I leaned forward a little, holding my phone up so he couldn't see my hand shaking. Is this some new thing drivers do? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Like memorizing passenger stats, he didn't laugh. His eyes stayed locked on mine in the mirror for just a beat too long. Then he said, you filed a complaint about a driver last month. He said he kept asking where you lived. You didn't like that. Mouth went dry. I had never filed that complaint. I thought about filing something once after a driver got weird and kept making comments, but I never actually sent it. I remembered typing it out in the help section and then backing out because I didn't want the hassle. The words he used were too close to what I'd typed, like he'd read it. Like he'd watched me hesitate. The SUV started moving, tires crunching lightly over dust and tiny bits of gravel. The garage lanes were narrow, and the concrete pillars made it feel like we were weaving through a maze. I watched the exit ramp ahead, the little rectangle of night outside, and tried to keep my breathing normal. My thumb hovered over my phone screen, ready to hit cancel or share my trip, but I forced myself not to do anything sudden yet. I didn't want to tip him off if he was just some creep making a sick joke. He kept talking, but not in a normal way. It wasn't small talk, it was like he was reading a file out loud. He mentioned my usual drop-off neighborhood, the time I typically ordered rides on weekdays, and even the name of a restaurant I'd been picked up from once months ago. Every time he said something specific, he'd glance at me like he was waiting for me to react the right way. Like there was a test I didn't know I was taking. By the time we reached the street, it was late enough that downtown looked half asleep. Most windows were dark, but the city still hummed with distant traffic, occasional music, and the glow of streetlights reflecting off glass. I tried to focus on normal details, his hands on the steering wheel. The smell inside the SUV was like cheap cologne mixed with stale air freshener. The little dash camera pointing forward, blinking red. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I decided I couldn't sit through a full ride like that, not with him knowing things he shouldn't. I tapped my phone to cancel and my screen didn't respond. I tried again, slower, pressing harder, like maybe my finger was just missing the button. Nothing. I swiped up, tried to close the app, and the screen didn't move at all. For a second I wondered if my phone had frozen, but I could still see the map updating. Our icon moved, the route line adjusted, and the little arriving in timer changed. My phone wasn't dead, it just wasn't reacting to my touch. It was like the glass had turned into something fake, something that only looked like a screen. I did the thing everyone does when their phone acts weird. I wiped my thumb on my jeans and tried again. Then I used my knuckle, then 2 fingers. Nothing registered. I felt this spike of panic because my whole plan depended on being able to do something quietly. I looked up and realized the driver was watching me in the mirror again, his eyes flicking down and back up like he could see exactly what I was trying. He said softly, "It's better if you just let the ride finish." Skin went cold. I forced myself to stop messing with my phone and set it in my lap like nothing was wrong. My brain started racing through options. I could call someone, but if the screen didn't respond, I couldn't even open my contacts. I could yell, but we were moving through mostly empty streets and the windows were up. I could ask him to stop, but if he was doing this on purpose, asking wasn't going to help. I started looking for anything I could use as a signal. We passed a late-night drive-through with a couple cars in line, and I watched it like it was a lifeboat. I thought about throwing the door open at a red light, but the locks looked like they were engaged, and the handle felt heavy under my palm, like it had no give. I looked for the child lock indicator on the door, and in the dim light I couldn't tell. He took a turn that didn't match the route. My phone map rerouted automatically, like it was normal, but I knew the streets well enough to know he'd gone the wrong way. We should have been heading toward my building, toward the bright streets and the guard gate. Instead, he cut into a quieter area, slipping between blocks where the storefronts were closed and the sidewalks were empty. The air outside looked thick with humidity, and the reflections in the windows made it hard to tell what was real movement and what was just light. I finally spoke up, keeping my voice calm because I didn't want it to crack. "Hey, I think you missed the turn. My place is the other way." Didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend to check. He said, "I know where it is. I've been there." The way he said it made my stomach flip, not like "I've driven there," but like he meant it personally. Like he knew the building, the garage, the way it echoed, and the exact spot where the camera didn't cover the far corner near the maintenance door. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights and tried to spot anyone, anything. A jogger, a dog walker, a cop car. It felt like the city had emptied out just for us. My phone buzzed once and I almost jumped. A notification popped up from the rideshare app, but it wasn't the normal "Are you safe" kind. It said something like "Trip details updated," and underneath it, the pickup location had changed. Not to where I'd actually gotten in. It showed some random intersection a few blocks away, like the ride had started somewhere else entirely. I felt my throat tighten and I tried to screenshot it, but my screen still wouldn't respond. I couldn't even press the side buttons right because my hands were shaking so badly. The driver's head tilted slightly, like he'd sensed that little surge of panic. He said almost gently, "You don't want to make it complicated." That's when I realized something that made me feel even more trapped. If he could mess with the trip details, if he could see things I'd never submitted, then this wasn't just a weird driver. It was someone using access he shouldn't have. Maybe it was stolen, maybe it was bought, but it was real enough to fool the app and trap me in the ride. We eventually looped back toward downtown, but not toward my building. He aimed us toward a different high-rise cluster, one that had an older look, less security, and darker entrances. I watched the route line on my screen, still updating, still pretending everything was normal. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. At the top of the app screen where it usually showed the driver's name and rating, the name looked slightly different now, like the letters had shifted, like it wasn't the same account that had accepted my ride. I didn't want to believe it, but my brain kept whispering the same thing. This is Uber. This is someone wearing the skin of it. He slowed down near an entrance to another underground garage. The sign was half broken and the ramp down looked darker than it should have been, like the lights didn't reach the bottom. He turned in without asking. The SUV dipped into the ramp and the sound changed immediately. It became that same hollow echo I knew from my own building's level B, only worse because this garage felt abandoned. As we rolled deeper, my phone screen suddenly responded again. It was so quick it almost felt like a trick. I didn't think, I just moved. My thumb hit the cancel button and the app popped up a loading circle. For a second I felt relief, like I'd found air after being underwater. Then the loading circle froze and the whole app turned gray, like it had locked up again on purpose. The driver didn't look surprised. He looked amused, like he'd let me try just to prove I couldn't. He stopped the SUV in a spot where the overhead lights were flickering, leaving the car half in shadow. I could see a stairwell door nearby with a red exit sign above it, but the door looked chained shut. My pulse was loud in my ears, louder than the engine idling. He turned his head slightly, still facing forward, and said, "I need you to confirm something." I swallowed. "What?" He lifted his right hand off the wheel and held up a second phone, not his driver phone, but a different one. The screen was bright and I could see my profile photo on it, not just my name, not just my rating, my actual account page, like he was logged in as me. Underneath my picture were little details I'd never thought about, like my email partially hidden, my saved addresses blurred, and the little history list. He said, "You have a safety feature turned on. The one with the pin, it asks for it sometimes. You're going to tell it to me." Chest tightened. I'd enabled that feature after one too many creepy rides, the one where you have to give a code to the driver so you don't get into the wrong car. I'd forgotten it was even on because it only popped up occasionally. But now he was saying it like he knew it would protect me, and he wanted to strip it away. I don't know it, I lied, and my voice sounded too thin. He finally smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was like he was trying on a face. It's on your screen, he said. It always is. I looked down at my phone. The app was still gray, but there was a number on it, a 4-digit code, sitting there like a dare. I realized if I said it out loud, he'd be able to start something, confirm something, or lock something in. I didn't know exactly what he could do with it, but I knew he wanted it badly enough to bring me here. I forced myself to breathe slowly and looked at the door handle again. I pulled it hard. The door didn't open. It was locked. The child lock wasn't even the scary part anymore. The scary part was how calm he stayed, like he'd already built this moment in his head. He glanced at me in the mirror one more time, and his eyes looked flat. You don't want to be the kind of person who complicates things, he said. I know where you live, I know where you work, I know what you type before you send it. That last line hit me like a punch. It wasn't just about rides, it was about access. About someone who could see drafts, half-made complaints, and things I assumed disappeared when I backed out. I pictured myself on my couch weeks ago, typing a complaint and deleting it, thinking it didn't matter. I pictured him reading it somewhere, saving it, and smiling because he'd found someone cautious. Someone who tried to protect herself. I did the only thing I could think of. I started screaming, not a movie scream, not some perfect dramatic sound, just loud, ugly panic, over and over, filling the car and bouncing off the concrete walls. I slammed my fist against the window, then against the back of the seat, making as much noise as possible. The driver's smile vanished instantly, like I'd flipped a switch he didn't expect. He hissed, "Stop," and for the first time his calm cracked. I kept screaming. My voice was shredded, but I didn't stop. I hit the door handle again and again, and on the fourth pull it popped open. It was like the lock had released for just a second, maybe by accident, maybe because he hadn't hit it in time. I didn't wait to understand. I shoved the door open and threw myself out, stumbling onto the concrete so hard my knees flashed with pain. I ran without looking back. My shoes slapped the garage floor, echoing so loud it felt like the building itself was chasing me. I aimed for the nearest ramp up, the one I could see faint light at the top of. Behind me I heard the SUV door slam, then the engine rev, but I didn't turn around. I just ran, gasping, throat burning, and legs shaking. When I reached the street, the humid night air hit me like a wall. I burst out near a corner where a security guard sat in a little booth for the building next door. He looked up, startled, as I sprinted toward him. I tried to explain, words tumbling out, pointing back toward the garage entrance, but my voice was wrecked, and I could barely get a sentence out. He stepped out of the booth and looked, but by then the SUV was already gone. I called the police with shaking hands, and this time my phone worked perfectly, like it had never betrayed me. They showed up, took my statement, and asked what the driver looked like, what the car looked like, and where exactly it happened. They were polite, but I could feel the way their attention drifted, like it was just another weird downtown story. One of them asked if I'd been drinking. Another asked if I was sure it was the right rideshare car. I showed them the app. The trip was still there, but the details were wrong. It listed a pickup spot I'd never stood at, a route that didn't match where we'd driven, and a driver name that wasn't the one I remembered seeing when I first matched. When I tried to hit report a safety issue, the app gave me an error message like my account didn't have permission. The police told me to contact support, and support sent me one of those cheerful automated replies that made my skin crawl. The next morning I woke up to an email saying my account had been logged into from a new device. The location tag just said Miami, FL, which was useless. I changed my password, turned on every security setting I could find, and spent an hour on hold trying to get a real human on the phone. By the time someone finally responded, they told me they couldn't verify unusual access and suggested I update my app, like what happened to me was a glitch. A few days later, I got another notification from the rideshare app. It asked me to rate my last trip. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Under the driver's name, it showed a 5-star rating already selected, like I'd done it myself. And underneath that, in the little feedback section, there was a sentence typed out that I didn't write. It said, "The driver was respectful and waited for permission." I deleted the app after that. I changed my email password, my bank password, everything. I even asked my building if they could pull garage footage, but they told me the cameras didn't cover level B near the elevator doors because of blind spots. I started taking taxis again, the old school kind, the kind where the driver didn't know my rating, my history, or my half-finished complaints. And still, sometimes when I'm alone in an underground garage and I hear tires roll slowly over concrete, I catch myself holding my phone tighter, wondering if the screen will listen to me, or if it's already listening to someone else. This happened during story 3. The back seat was still warm. Everyone was afraid of what was outside, but my fear came from inside my own house. I live in Aurora, Colorado, in a small rental house tucked into one of those neighborhoods where everything looks the same at night. Same tan siding, same little porches, same 2-car driveways. That winter, I'd started going to a 24-hour fitness center because my work schedule was weird, and late nights were the only time I could stay consistent. The gym sat off a main road with a drop-off lane under harsh floodlights that buzzed like angry insects. It was the kind of place that felt safe because it was bright, not because it actually was. That night, I finished my workout a little after 1 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty, and the cold had that dry Colorado bite where it stings your nose the second you step outside. My car was in the shop, so I'd been using Uber for about a week. I stood in the drop-off lane with my gym bag and watched my breath fog in front of my face while the app showed the driver getting closer. When the headlights finally turned in, I felt that normal little wave of relief you get when you're done being out in the open. The car rolled up slow and smooth, a dark sedan that looked clean and new. The driver cracked his window and asked my name, and I confirmed it. He unlocked the doors, and I opened the back door on the passenger side. The second I slid in, I stopped moving without meaning to. The seat was warm. Not the car heaters on warm, but body warm, like someone had just stood up and I'd taken their spot. For a couple seconds, my brain tried to make it normal. Maybe the driver had taken a break and sat back here earlier. Maybe it was heated seats, even though I didn't feel any heat on my legs, just that leftover warmth that fades fast. I shifted a little and pressed my palm down, and it was still there, especially toward the corner by the door. I looked at the other side of the back seat, half expecting to see a jacket or a bag left behind. It was empty. No trash, no clothes, nothing. The driver pulled away from the gym, and the floodlights disappeared behind us. He had music playing low, some talk radio or a podcast, and the inside of the car smelled like air freshener and coffee. I stared at the back of his headrest, trying not to look paranoid, but I kept thinking about that warmth and how it didn't make sense. I checked the window reflection to see if I'd missed someone in the car, like a person slumped down low. All I saw was my own face and the dark road behind us. A few minutes went by, and I started to relax in spite of myself. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. It was quiet, like the sound of someone breathing through their nose. Just a soft inhale, then a slow exhale. It didn't come from the front, it came from behind me. From somewhere over my right shoulder, like someone sitting right there in the corner of the back seat where my hand had felt the warmth. I froze so hard I could feel my neck tense up. I didn't turn around right away. I did that thing where you hold your own breath to listen better, hopping it's your imagination and not something real. But the sound kept going, in, out. Like someone trying to breathe quietly, but not quiet enough. My heart started thudding and the skin on my arms prickled under my hoodie. I glanced toward the driver in the rearview mirror, and that's when I noticed him looking at me too. His eyes flicked up, then away, like he didn't want to be caught staring. A second later, he spoke in a calm voice, like we were having a normal conversation. He asked, "Why do you keep looking behind you?" The way he said it wasn't playful. It sounded careful. I swallowed and tried to keep my voice steady. "The seat was warm when I got in," I said, like someone was just back here. The driver didn't respond right away. He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight like he was thinking about what to say. Then he finally said, "No one's been in my car all night." Right after he said that, the breathing got louder. Not loud like a gasp, but louder like whoever it was stopped trying to hide it. It was closer, too, like it had shifted. I snapped my eyes to the empty seat beside me, and I swear I saw the fabric dip slightly, just for a second, as if weight pressed down and then lifted. My whole body went cold. I couldn't make myself turn fully around. The driver must have heard it, because he reached over and turned the music up without asking. The radio voice got louder, filling the car, but it didn't cover the sound completely. The breathing stayed underneath it, steady and patient. My throat felt tight, and I could taste that dry, metallic fear taste in my mouth. I didn't know what to do, because if there was someone back there, I didn't want to trigger them by making it obvious. We drove like that for a few more minutes, and it felt like hours. Every time the car stopped at a light, I felt trapped, like something was going to lunge forward the second we weren't moving. The driver kept glancing at the rearview mirror in quick, nervous flashes. At one point, he asked, "Do you want me to pull over?" His voice was still calm, but his hands were tight on the steering wheel. I didn't answer right away. I was listening again, trying to figure out where the breathing was coming from. It sounded like it was right behind my head now, like whoever it was leaned forward. I forced myself to speak. "Just keep driving," I said. "Maybe take me somewhere with people." The driver didn't argue. He nodded once, like he already planned to. He didn't take the route to my house anymore. Instead, he made a turn that put us onto a bigger road with more lights. I recognized it because I'd driven it 100 times, and it led toward a strip of late-night places, gas stations, and fast food. The whole time, my eyes stayed fixed forward, but I could feel that presence behind me like heat off a stove. Even with the cold air from outside pressing against the windows, it felt warmer in the back seat. We pulled into a brightly lit convenience store around 1:30 a.m. The driver didn't park at the side. He stopped right in front by the doors under the lights where the cameras were. He put the car in park and said, "Get out and go inside. Don't stand around." I hesitated because leaving the car meant I had to move. It meant I had to turn my back on whatever was behind me. I forced myself to do it anyway. I grabbed my gym bag, pushed the door open, and stepped out fast. The cold hit me like a slap, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I expected something. person to slip out after me, a shadow to move anything. But the back seat looked empty, no movement, no door opening, just me standing there, shaking. I walked into the store and stood near the counter, pretending to look at snacks while I watched through the window. The driver was still in the car, phone up to his ear. He wasn't looking back anymore. He stared straight ahead like he didn't want to see. The music was still playing, muffled through the glass. I watched the back seat for a long time and nothing happened. Police cruiser pulled in maybe 10 minutes later. The driver got out and spoke to the officer, pointing at the car and then back at me inside. The officer came in and asked if I was the one who called, and I explained what happened, trying not to sound like I was making it up. I told him about the warm seat, the breathing, and the driver saying no one had been there. The officer's face did that polite, tired thing, like he'd heard strange stories before and had already decided how serious it was. They checked the car anyway. They opened the back doors, shined a flashlight under the seats, and checked the trunk. The driver even popped the hood like maybe someone had hidden there, which didn't make sense. The officer came back and told me there was no one in the car, no signs anyone had been in the trunk, and nothing suspicious. Then he asked if I'd been drinking or taking anything. I told him I'd just come from the gym. He nodded like he believed me, but not fully. The driver offered to cancel the ride, but I didn't want to be stranded. I didn't want to wait outside for another car after that. The officer stayed while I got back into the back seat, and this time I sat in the middle so I wasn't close to that corner. The seat felt cool now, like it should have from the start. The driver's eyes met mine in the mirror for a second, and he said quietly, "I'm taking you straight home. Doors stay locked." I just nodded. The rest of the ride was tense but quiet. The music stayed up. I didn't hear breathing again, or maybe I did and the music covered it, and I didn't want to find out. When we pulled up to my house, the driver didn't even look back. He just said, "Have a good night," in that flat voice people use when they're trying to sound normal. He got out fast and stood under my porch light until his car pulled away. I watched the taillights disappear, and only then did I breathe normally. Inside my house, everything looked the same as when I'd left. The living room was dim, lit by the small lamp I always left on for myself. I dropped my bag and tried to laugh it off in my head, telling myself it was stress, it was the cold, it was nothing. But as soon as the quiet settled in, I realized my house didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. Like when someone is in another room and you can sense it, even if you can't hear them. I checked my locks, even though I knew I'd locked up before leaving. The front door was locked, back door too. I walked room to room, turning on lights, trying to prove to myself everything was fine. My bedroom was fine, the bathroom was fine, the spare room I used as an office was fine. I ended up standing in the hallway, telling myself I was being ridiculous when I heard it again, breathing, not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft, steady inhale and exhale. It came from somewhere deeper in the house, like it was drifting through the air vents. I stood still and listened, and the sound seemed to come from the direction of my laundry room, which was right next to a small closet that held cleaning supplies. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to move, step by step, toward that part of the house. The laundry room light was off. The closet door beside it was shut, but not all the way. It was cracked open maybe an inch. I stared at that crack like it was the most important thing in the world. I knew in a logical way that it could have been left like that earlier, but I also knew I always shut that closet door because it sticks and it annoys me when it's open. I could hear the breathing clearer now, like it was right behind the thin wood. I backed up and grabbed the heaviest thing I could think of, which was a metal baseball bat I kept in my bedroom closet. I came back holding it with both hands, my arms shaking. The breathing stopped the second I got close again, like whoever it was knew. That was somehow worse. Silence meant listening. Silence meant waiting. I called the non-emergency line with my phone pressed to my ear, whispering like a kid hiding under blankets. The operator asked for my address and what was happening, and I told her I thought someone might be inside my house. She asked if I could leave safely, and I said I didn't know. She said an officer would be sent, but her tone made it clear it wasn't going to be instant. Aurora isn't small, and it was late, and I could already imagine them taking their time. I stood in my living room with the bat and watched the hallway like it was going to blink. Every tiny sound made me jump, the fridge humming, the heater clicking on, the house settling. After what felt like forever, headlights swept across my front window, and 2 officers knocked. I rushed to the door and let them in, stumbling over my words as I explained the Uber thing and then the breathing in the closet. They did a quick search. They checked rooms, closets, and under beds. One of them opened the cleaning closet, shined a flashlight inside, and found nothing but detergent and a mop bucket. He looked at me like he expected me to be embarrassed. Then he asked if I owned any pets. I said no. The other officer suggested it could be air moving through vents or pipes. I wanted to scream at him that pipes don't stop breathing when you get close. They left after telling me to call again if I saw an actual person. That sentence stuck with me. Like hearing someone breathe inches away wasn't enough, like fear needed proof. I locked the door behind them and stood in my living room feeling stupid and angry and terrified all at once. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that warm seat. I pictured something sitting right behind me, patient and quiet. Around 3:40 a.m. I gave up on sleep and sat on my couch with the TV on low just to have noise. That's when my phone buzzed with a notification from my doorbell camera. Motion detected. I sat up so fast my shoulders popped. The alert showed a still image from my porch, grainy and washed out by the night vision. It was me earlier, standing there after the Uber left, except there was something else in the frame too. Behind me, close enough to almost be touching my back, was a darker shape. It didn't look like a person exactly. It looked like a smudge, like the camera had glitched. But it was shaped wrong to be a shadow from the porch light. It had a rounder top, and it seemed to lean toward me as if it was right there with me on the porch, looking over my shoulder at the door I was unlocking. I replayed the clip again and again. In the video, I walked up, fumbled with my keys, and opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, the dark shape moved forward too, like it followed me. Then the camera view cut off as the door closed. I watched it so many times I started to feel sick. My hands were sweating and the room felt too small. I checked my front door camera settings, thinking maybe it was a bug. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop even harder. There was a second motion event recorded a few minutes later after I'd already been inside. I tapped it and held my breath. The porch was empty, no car, no people, nothing. Then the door handle moved. It didn't swing open, it just turned slightly like someone tested it. Then it stopped. A second later, the handle moved again, slower, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. The door didn't open because I'd locked it, but the handle moved one more time, and right before the clip ended, the audio picked up something faint, a breath, a soft exhale right up close to the microphone. The next morning, I called the Uber driver through the app, not even sure if it would connect. He answered after a few rings and didn't say hello like a normal person. He just said my name like he already knew why I was calling. I asked him if he'd heard the breathing too, and there was a long pause. Then he said quietly, yeah. I asked why he hadn't told the police that, why he'd acted like it was just me. He said, because they never believe it, and I still have to work. I didn't go back to that gym at night after that. I didn't take Uber for a while either. I started driving again as soon as my car was out of the shop, even if it meant leaving earlier and dealing with traffic. For weeks, I kept every light on in my house at night. I checked every room before bed. I slept with my door locked and a chair wedged under the handle, like that would stop anything that really wanted in. About a month later, I was about to delete those camera clips because watching them made me feel crazy. Before I did, I zoomed in on the porch video one last time, trying to see if the dark shape could be explained. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Right as the shape moved toward the door behind me, the porch light flickered for a split second, like it struggled. And in that flicker, the smudge looked less like a glitch and more like someone standing just out of focus, face turned toward the camera. I moved out of that house when my lease was up. I told my friends it was for a shorter commute, and that was partly true. But the real reason was that I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that Uber didn't just ride along. It learned where I lived, it tested my door, it waited in my quiet rooms. And even now in my new place, every once in a while, I'll be lying in bed half asleep, and I'll hear that slow, careful breathing from somewhere behind me, like the back seat is still warm. This happened on a cold bartending shift night. I thought the tapping on my window was just branches, but it was. My name is Hannah Whitmore. I am 27, and at the time this happened, I was living in a third-floor walk-up in the River West neighborhood of Milwaukee. If you know River West, you know it has this weird mix of college kids, artists, and people who have just never left. I was bartending at a small neighborhood place that catered to all of them. Late nights, cheap beer, and a lot of faces I saw way too often. My building was one of those old Milwaukee houses that had been chopped up into apartments sometime around the 70s, judging by the yellowed light switches and the avocado green tiles in the hallway. You walked in through a heavy wooden front door that never quite closed unless you threw your weight into it. The intercom panel next to it was cracked and dead. The landlord used to tell us to just text our guests because the buzzer had been broken for years. Inside, the carpet on the stairs and hallway was flattened and stained from decades of tenants, and the overhead lights buzzed and hummed before they flicked on. It wasn't the nicest place I had ever lived, but the rent was cheap, and the third floor felt safer somehow than ground level. My usual routine was pretty simple. I worked the evening shift most nights from around 5 until close. Sometimes that meant midnight, sometimes later if there was a game on. I did not own a car, and I didn't like walking home that late, especially in winter, so I relied on rideshare apps. The bar was about a 10-minute drive from my building on Weil, and most nights I would put in for a ride as I was wiping down the last table, then step outside into the cold and watch the little car icon inch its way toward me. It became such a habit that I didn't think about it anymore. This particular night was in January, the kind of cold where the air hurts your lungs when you step outside. The bar had been busy with people trying to escape the weather, hands wrapped around cheap whiskey and domestic beer. By the time we called last call, my feet were killing me, and all I could think about was getting home, peeling off my jeans and hoodie, and crawling under my comforter. I checked the clock over the bar. It was around 11:45 p.m. while I was rinsing glasses. As usual, I opened the rideshare app, hit home, and confirmed the address of my apartment. First, I didn't notice anything weird. I was on autopilot, going through the motions, tip out, wipe down the bar tops, and stack the mats. But when I glanced back at my phone to see how far away my ride was, my stomach did this weird little flip. The pickup location on the map wasn't the bar. It was my apartment building. The little pin was planted directly on top of my address in River West, like I was already standing there instead of behind the bar. For a second, I thought I had just tapped the wrong saved location. I backed out, re-entered the bar's address manually, and confirmed again. The map refreshed, the screen zoomed out, and when it zoomed back in, the pin was still sitting on my apartment. It even had the label underneath, home. Under that, in smaller text, it said, "Meet your driver at the front entrance." I frowned and tried a third time. I closed and reopened the app, checked that my location services were on, and even turned my phone's Wi-Fi off in case it was jumping to my home network somehow. No matter what I did, whenever I requested a ride, it insisted I was requesting it from my building, not the bar. I didn't want to walk outside into the cold and hope for a passing cab at almost midnight, so I told myself it was just some glitch. The car would still come to the bar, I figured. The app always found me before. By the time we finished locking up, my ride was supposedly 3 minutes away. I zipped my jacket up to my chin, pulled on my gloves, and stepped outside into the empty street. River West after hours has this quiet that is somehow different from other neighborhoods. There are still a few lit windows and a couple of cars passing, but under that, there's this feeling of being very alone. I stood under the bar's flickering neon sign, watching my breath fog up in front of me while I stared at the screen. The app showed my driver's little sedan icon turning down my street, except it was turning down the street where my apartment was, not the one I was standing on. I watched it pull up and stop right in front of the pin that marked my building, 1.5 miles away. Underneath the map, it updated to, "Your driver has arrived, meet at the front entrance." A little countdown started, warning me that my driver would leave and I'd be charged a no-show fee. I felt this weird wave of irritation and confusion. I hit the call button in the app. The line rang a couple of times before a man picked up. "Hey, I think the app glitched," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm actually at a bar on Locust, not at home. I can update the address." He cut me off. His voice was flat and confused. I'm at the address on the app, the 3 flat with the red steps." That was definitely my building. I could picture the peeling red paint on the front stairs. "You already came down," he added. "I opened the door for you. You got in like 30 seconds ago. Are you messing with me?" I remember staring at the empty sidewalk in front of the bar, the locked glass door behind me, and feeling my face go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "No," I said slowly. "I'm still at work. I'm not at home. I never left the bar. I'm standing outside right now." For a second, there was nothing but static and the muffled sound of his car's heater. Then he sighed, annoyed. "Look, I'm not trying to argue, but I watched you walk down the steps and get into the car. Same jacket as the picture, same hair. You even said it was freezing. I'm driving now. I can't turn around unless you cancel." I checked the app again. It no longer said arriving. It said on trip, with a little blue route line stretching away from my building, heading south. I could see the car moving in real time, except I was not in that car. I could still feel my phone in my gloved hand, the cold seeping through my boots. My manager poked his head out the door behind me and asked if my ride was there yet, snapping me out of it. I stammered something about the app being weird and ended the call. The driver immediately sent one text: "I'll report this as a completed trip." Not my problem if your friend used your account. A part of me wanted to argue with him, to tell him that I lived alone and no one else had my login. But something about the way he said he watched me walk down made my skin crawl. Instead of fighting it, I just canceled the ride, took the fee, and requested another. This time, when I put in the bar's address, the app behaved normally. A different driver accepted, and I watched their car approach the bar on the correct street. The whole way home, I tried to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe the driver had picked up the wrong person at a different building that looked like mine. Maybe there was a bug that stuck my home location into the ride. It was weird, but tech glitches happen. When we pulled up to my building, everything looked normal. The snow piles along the sidewalk were dirty from days of plows scraping past. The streetlights had that orange glow that makes everything look a little grimy. I thanked my driver, got out, and started up the red-painted front steps. They creaked under my weight the way they always did. The heavy front door was closed but not fully latched, like someone had just gone in without giving it that final shoulder shove. I pushed it open and it swung in easily, a waft of warm, stale hallway air hitting me in the face. The entryway light was on, buzzing faintly. The dead intercom panel hung at an awkward angle on the wall, its little plastic buttons dusty and useless. I closed the door behind me and made sure it actually latched this time, out of habit. The carpeting on the stairs was threadbare and smelled vaguely like old mop water in someone's cooking from earlier. As I climbed, the sounds of the neighborhood faded. By the time I got to the 3rd floor, it was just my own footsteps and the soft squeak of my keyring against my fingers. My apartment was at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. The door across from mine belonged to a middle-aged guy named Ron who worked nights at a factory. I almost never saw him. That night the hallway was empty and the light over my door was flickering faintly. I remember noticing that because I thought, great, one more thing in this building that doesn't work. My doormat was slightly crooked, like someone had caught their shoe on it. I I straightened it automatically and unlocked my door. The first thing that hit me when I stepped inside was how cold the apartment still was. I usually left the heat on low so it would not be freezing when I got in, but the air felt almost as chilly as outside. I could see my breath for a second. I closed the door behind me, slid the chain lock across, and tossed my keys into the little ceramic bowl on the counter. They missed and clattered onto the floor instead, which annoyed me more than it should have. That was when I noticed the bowl was not where I usually left it. It had been nudged a few inches to the left, closer to the stove. It was such a small detail that part of me wanted to ignore it. People move things and forget all the time, but something about the combination of the cold inside, the crooked doormat, and now this tiny shift in my routine made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I did a quick walkthrough of the apartment just to make myself feel better. One small bedroom, a bathroom, and a living room that opened into a tiny kitchen. The windows were closed and locked, the balcony door was bolted. Nothing looked obviously disturbed. Still, I checked the closet and under the bed like a kid. Nothing. I decided to put on something warmer before I overthought myself into a panic. I changed into sweats and a hoodie, microwaved some leftover pasta, and sat on the couch with the TV on low. I told myself I was being dramatic about the ride thing. Somewhere a stranger had just gotten a free ride on my account. I'd contact support in the morning, get the charge reversed, and that would be the end of it. Around 12:10 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email notification. When I saw who it was from, I felt another little twist in my stomach. The email was from the rideshare company. Subject line, "Your trip with David is complete." David was the first driver, the one who claimed I'd gotten into his car. I opened it. The receipt showed pickup at my home address and no drop-off location, just trip in progress that had somehow still generated a charge. The timestamp said the trip began at 11:51 p.m. that lined up almost exactly with when I was still closing up the bar. At the bottom, there was a small link that said, "View trip details." I tapped it, half wondering if I'd see some obvious error. Instead, it took me to a screen with a static image from what looked like a dash camera or a phone mounted near the dashboard. It was dark and grainy, but I could make out a figure sitting in the front passenger seat. Hoodie, light-colored hair pulled back in a messy bun, profile turned slightly toward the window. The face was blurred just enough by motion and poor lighting that I couldn't say with 100% certainty it was mine. But the shape of the nose, the way the hair fell, and even the little fold of fabric at the neckline of the hoodie looked horribly familiar. My own stomach was visible in my peripheral vision when I looked down. I was wearing a hoodie identical to the one in the photo. For a full minute, I just sat there staring at my own couch, my own legs, and that image on my phone. It felt like looking into a mirror that was a few minutes out of sync with reality. I took a screenshot, closed the app, and emailed support, explaining that I had not taken that trip, that I had been at work and could prove it, and that I wanted the charge investigated. After I sent it, I threw my phone onto the coffee table and turned the TV volume up a little, trying to drown out the quiet. Eventually, I got up, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I don't remember what time I finally fell asleep, but it felt like it took forever. When I did, it was that kind of shallow, restless sleep where your body is heavy but your mind is still spinning. Sometime later, I woke up to a sound. At first, I couldn't place it. I thought it was part of a dream, a faint, repetitive noise. It took my sluggish brain a second to realize what it was, a soft, irregular tapping on the window above my bed. Tap, 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 tap. The wind was howling outside, so my first thought was the same thought anybody would have, tree branches. My bedroom window faced the side alley with a rusty fire escape right outside it. There were no trees close enough for branches to scrape the glass. I knew that, but I was half asleep, and logic comes second when you're groggy. I lay there listening. Tap, tap, a pause, then a rapid series of quicker taps, almost like fingers drumming lightly on a table. My heart started to pound. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed felt too deep. I finally forced myself to sit up, every instinct screaming at me to just stay still and pretend I hadn't heard anything. I reached for my phone on the nightstand but came up empty. I'd left it on the coffee table. So instead, I slowly turned my head toward the window. The blinds were down, but there was a faint orange glow from the alley light outside. The tapping started again, even softer now, like whoever or whatever it was had moved closer to the glass. I slid out of bed, trying not to make the mattress springs creak, and took a few steps to the window. The heater kicked on in the living room, rattling the pipes in the wall, making the quiet feel even more fragile. With one hand, I lifted the bottom of the blinds just an inch, just enough to see outside. The fire escape was empty. The metal grate, the railing, and the brick wall across the alley are all still and silent. Snow had blown in and gathered in the corners of the metal steps. There was no movement, no dark figure, nothing that could have made that tapping sound. I let the blinds fall and backed away slowly. That was when I heard a different noise, a muffled thump from the direction of the hallway. It sounded like a footstep landing on that old carpet right outside my door. I stood in the dark, holding my breath, listening. Another soft thud, like weight shifting from one foot to the other. The chain on my front door rattled very slightly in its bracket, just enough that I heard the tiny metallic click. I remembered very suddenly the crooked doormat in the cold apartment and that image of me in the front seat of a car I had never stepped into. My chest tightened. I wanted to call anyone, but my phone was still in the living room. After a long minute where nothing else happened, I managed to move. Tiptoed down the short hall toward the living room, staying as close to the wall as possible. The living room was dimly lit by the glow of the TV menu, which had kicked on after whatever show I'd been watching ended. My phone lay face down on the coffee table. As I reached for it, it buzzed in my hand, making me jump so hard I almost dropped it. I flipped it over. There was a new notification from the rideshare app. It said, "Your driver has arrived at your pickup location. Meet at the front entrance." My eyes flicked up to the time in the corner of the screen, 1:16. The pickup address listed underneath was my own. For a second, I almost convinced myself it had to be some delayed glitch from earlier. But then I saw the smaller text under the driver's name. "This ride is for Hannah, secondary account." I didn't have a secondary account. I tapped into the notification, my fingers trembling. The map showed my building, the same little pin stuck at the front entrance, and a car icon stopped right in front of it. The app said, "We've notified your rider that you're here." I stared at those words, my brain trying to process them. I wasn't the driver, I was the rider, yet somehow it was talking about me in the third person. Before I could do anything, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Not loud, not a pounding, just 3 quick, polite knocks. They sounded even softer through the old wood and carpet, but I could tell they were right at my door, not somewhere else in the building. Whoever was on the other side didn't try the knob and didn't say anything. They just knocked once, waited, then knocked again. My phone buzzed in my hand while the knocking continued. Another notification popped up, this time an email banner at the top of the screen. The sender name made my blood run cold. It said, "From Hannah Whitmore." The subject line was, "Your ride is here." Underneath, in the preview text, I could see the first line of the email. "Come outside, I'm waiting at the door." I hadn't written that email. My other hand went automatically to the chain on the door, feeling that thin strip of metal like it was the only thing between me and whatever the app had decided I was. The knocking stopped. The hallway went quiet again. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes before slowly backing away into the living room, never taking my eyes off the door. Eventually, the notification from the rideshare app changed to, "Your driver has canceled. You were charged a fee." Then the car icon on the map started moving again, pulling away from the pin that marked my building and heading off into the grid of city streets. I watched it drive south until it disappeared. Only then did I open the email fully. It was short and simple. No greeting, no signature, just, "Come outside, I'm waiting at the door." The sender address was my own, the same Gmail I used for everything. There was no record of it in my sent folder. The next morning, support replied to my complaint about the earlier trip. They apologized for the confusion, refunded the charge, and attached a note from the driver, David. He claimed that the rider entered the vehicle and confirmed the name Hannah, and that he had a dash cam still to prove it. There was a second image attached. It was another shot from inside his car, this time taken from behind. You could see the back of the passenger's head, hood down, hair in a messy bun. You could see the shape of the shoulders and the small, chipped corner of a phone case sitting in that person's lap, identical to mine. The timestamp matched the exact time the app said I was at home, requesting a ride. I moved out of that apartment 2 months later after finishing up my lease. People ask if anything else happened in the meantime, and I wish I could say no, that it was just a one-time glitch. But every few weeks, usually late at night, I would get a random email or notification that didn't make sense. An alert that your ride has started when I was lying on my couch. A reminder that I had left a 4-star rating for a ride I had never taken. Twice I got emails from myself with no subject line and no body, just an empty message from my own address showing up in my inbox like an echo. I changed my password, deleted the app, and even got a new phone. It helped for a while, but a couple of weeks ago, on a night just as cold as that one in River West, my phone buzzed while I was brushing my teeth. When I looked, there was a notification at the top of the screen from the rideshare company, even though I hadn't reinstalled anything. "Your driver has arrived at your pickup location," it said. "Meet at the front entrance." Underneath, in faint gray text, was the address they were headed to. It wasn't the place I live now. It was my old building in River West. I don't know if the app duplicated me, if someone out there is riding around under my name, or if it's just some massive glitch that I happen to be awake enough to notice. But every time my phone lights up with a buzz now, I feel that same cold creep up my spine. Because somewhere in the city, there's still a version of me that the system recognizes, that drivers pick up, and that emails get sent for. And the worst part is, whoever is getting into those cars knows exactly where I live and what I look like, because if the apps think they're me, that means they know everything I ever told them. It was late fall when I moved to Houston for a short contract job, and I was trying to save money. The place I found was cheap for a reason. It was a half-underground unit behind an older house, with a separate side door that led down a short set of concrete steps. When it rained, the whole little stairwell turned into a shallow pool, and the air inside always smelled faintly like wet drywall and old laundry. The neighborhood sat close enough to the ship channel that I could see the glow at night, even through the gap in the trees. Some evenings the sky looked bruised and orange, like a storm was stuck behind the refineries. I got used to the sound of distant trucks, the low rumble that never fully stopped, and the way the rain seemed to come down harder near the water. It wasn't a scary area exactly, but it didn't feel welcoming either. It felt like a place you passed through, not a place you belonged. Most nights I kept to myself. My routine was simple: work, microwave dinner, shower, and then something mindless on my phone until I fell asleep. Upstairs, the landlord's son lived with his girlfriend, and I heard them often: footsteps, a chair scraping, a cabinet slamming shut. At first it was almost comforting because it meant I wasn't alone in the building. But after a couple weeks, I started noticing sounds that didn't match what was happening above me. The first time I was standing at my tiny sink washing a plate when I heard slow footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Not upstairs, not overhead, right outside on the other side of the basement wall. The steps were careful, like someone was trying not to make noise, and they stopped directly in front of my unit. I froze with the faucet still running, listening for a knock or a voice. Nothing came. After a few seconds, the steps moved away and faded into the rain. I told myself it was probably the landlord checking something, or a neighbor cutting through the side yard. The problem was there wasn't really anywhere to cut through. My entrance was down a narrow strip between fences, and it ended at my door. If someone walked down there, they had a reason. That night I checked the deadbolt twice, then pushed a chair under the knob even though I knew it wouldn't do much. Over the next few days, it happened again. Always when it was raining. Always late when the upstairs lights were already off. I'd hear the splash of water on concrete, the soft scuff of shoes, and then the pause outside my door like whoever it was deciding something. Once I got brave enough to flick on the porch light switch near the entryway. The light came on bright and harsh, shining down the wet steps. I pressed my face near the curtain over the tiny window beside my door, but I didn't see anyone. The next morning I checked the stairwell anyway. There were muddy footprints on the bottom step, and they weren't mine. The prints were big, like work boots. They angled toward my door, stopped, then turned back the way they came. I stared at them for a long time, feeling stupid for letting something that small get to me, and then feeling even worse because I couldn't explain it away. A few nights later, the rain got heavier, the kind that turns the streets into mirrors. My job had me working late, and I missed my bus connection because the first one showed up 10 minutes behind schedule. I stood under a metal awning at the stop, watching the road shine black under the streetlights, and I finally gave up and called for a rideshare. I just wanted to get back to my basement, lock the door, and pretend the world didn't exist. The app showed my driver was 5 minutes away. The name was Martin, and the car was an older sedan with a dull silver color. When it pulled up, the headlights washed over the wet sidewalk, and I saw the outline of someone sitting very straight behind the wheel. The window slid down only a few inches, just enough for his voice to come through. He asked my name, I confirmed it, and then he unlocked the doors with a quick click. The first thing I noticed when I got in was the smell. Not exactly cigarettes, but that stale, soaked-in odor like someone had smoked in the car for years and then tried to cover it with cheap air fresheners. The second thing was how quiet he was, not the comfortable kind of quiet either. He didn't greet me or ask how my night was. He just pulled away from the curb, wipers dragging back and forth, and kept both hands on the steering wheel like he was taking a driving test. His hands were locked at 10 and 2, and he didn't move them even when we turned. He didn't scratch his face or adjust his mirror. He didn't even reach down to change the climate controls. The car felt humid and cold at the same time, like the air conditioner was struggling against the wet heat outside. I told myself maybe he was just tense or tired. We merged onto a frontage road that ran beside the ship channel, and the scenery changed fast. The neighborhood lights thinned out, replaced by massive industrial silhouettes and long fences topped with barbed wire. In the distance, refineries glowed orange through the rain, like giant furnaces behind fog. A few big trucks thundered past us, spraying mist, and their taillights stretched into red smears on the wet pavement. Then the radio popped on. It wasn't music, it wasn't a voice. It was pure static, loud and sharp, like someone had ripped open a bag of sand next to my ears. It startled me so bad I flinched and looked at the dashboard. The volume was cranked way higher than normal, high enough that it made my teeth feel tight. Martin didn't react. He didn't even blink. He just kept driving with both hands glued to the wheel. At first I assumed it was an accident, like his elbow bumped the radio. But his elbows weren't near it. His posture didn't change at all. The static kept blasting, drowning out everything else, even the sound of the rain. I leaned forward slightly, expecting him to reach out and turn it down. He didn't. I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, your radio is kind of loud." No response. He stared straight ahead, face lit by the passing glow from industrial lights and the occasional street lamp. I tried to see his eyes in the rearview mirror, but the angle wasn't right. His jaw was tight, like he was clenching his teeth. The static kept going, steady and violent, and I started to feel that weird pressure behind my eyes like I was about to get a headache. It felt rude to touch someone else's car controls, but it was so loud it hurt. I leaned forward again, reaching toward the volume knob. I was just trying to be polite about it, like I'd turn it down a little and that would be the end of it. My fingers were an inch away when Martin finally spoke. His voice was low and flat, like he was trying not to wake someone sleeping in the back seat. He said. I froze mid-reach and pulled my hand back, more confused than anything. Sorry, I said, sitting back. I just thought, it answers when you do, he added, still staring at the road. I let out a small laugh that didn't sound right, like I was forcing it. Answers? Martin didn't explain. He didn't even glance at me. The static went on and I started to notice something under it. At first it was just a faint pattern, like the noise was swelling and dipping in waves. Then it started to sound almost like breathing. Not literal breathing, but the rhythm of it, like the static was trying to imitate something human. We passed a sign for an upcoming exit and the road curved slightly. A line of dark water ran along the shoulder, reflecting refinery lights like melted copper. The static shifted, and for a second I thought I heard a voice buried in it, the way you sometimes think you hear words when you're half asleep. I told myself it was my brain trying to make sense of random noise. Then I heard my name, not clearly, not like someone spoke it in a normal voice. It was more like the static tightened into syllables for half a second and then fell apart again. But I knew what it sounded like. It sounded like me being called from across a room. My stomach went cold. I stared at the radio display like it might show a station name or a Bluetooth connection. It was just lit up with the normal numbers. Martin's hands stayed at 10 and 2. His knuckles looked pale. The static surged again and the voice came back, stronger this time, shaping into my name over and over. It didn't sound like a man or a woman. It sounded like a bad impression of a person, like an old voicemail that had been copied too many times. The longer it went on, the more I realized it wasn't saying my name the way a friend would. It was saying it like it was testing it, like it was trying to get it right. I forced myself to look out the window instead, trying to ground myself. The rain streaked sideways across the glass. On the other side of the road, a long chain-link fence ran parallel to us, beyond it a dark stretch of trees and industrial lots. The glow from the refineries pulsed through the rain, and for a second I felt like we were driving through the underside of a machine. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe it was some weird radio interference picking up a signal. Maybe Martin had some messed up audio file playing, like a prank or something. The problem was he didn't seem amused. He seemed scared in a way that didn't show on his face, only in how rigid he was. The voice in the static changed. It stopped repeating my name and started saying it slower, stretching it out like it wanted me to respond. I swallowed hard, realizing my palms were sweating. I wanted to ask Martin what he meant, but my throat felt tight, and I didn't want to give the static any attention. Then, under my name, I heard another thing. Something that made my skin prickle. It sounded like my own voice. It wasn't saying anything clear at first. It was like a recording playing through a broken speaker, chopped up and dragged through noise. But it had my rhythm, my tone, the way I paused before certain words. I sat there staring at the radio, feeling like I was watching someone wear my face. I turned my head toward Martin. Is this some kind of joke? He finally moved, just a little, not his hands. Only his eyes flicking toward me for half a second. The look he gave me was enough to shut me up. It wasn't angry, it wasn't amused, it was warning. Talk to it, he said, quiet. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. The static wavered again, and the voice that sounded like mine got clearer for a moment. It said a few words that made no sense together, like it was assembling pieces. Then it said my name again, followed by a sound like a soft laugh. I jerked back in my seat. I knew that laugh. It was mine. Not exactly, but close enough that it made my stomach twist. My brain scrambled for explanations that didn't make me feel insane. Maybe it was some kind of voice app. Maybe Martin had recorded me. But how would he have recorded me? I had just gotten into his car. The road ahead narrowed where construction barriers forced traffic into one lane. Orange reflective markers flashed by, and the car hummed over wet grooves in the pavement. The static kept talking, and the more I listened, the more it felt like it was learning, like it was getting better. I tried to distract myself by checking my phone. The screen reflected my face back at me in the dark, pale and tense. The rideshare app showed our route, the little car icon moving along the frontage road. For a second that helped, because it reminded me we were still in a real place on real streets. But then the radio said my name again, and this time it added something else. It said downstairs. The word was muffled, but I heard it. My entire body went cold in a way that didn't feel normal. Downstairs, the one word that fit too perfectly into my life. The one word that matched the thing I hadn't told anyone about, not even my coworkers. I stared at the radio like it had just turned into a mouth. Martin's jaw tightened. His hands stayed locked. Don't, he repeated like he was talking to both me and the radio. What is this? I whispered without meaning to. My voice sounded small. The static snapped louder like it heard me. My name came again, faster now, like it was excited. Then the imitation of my voice came back, clearer than before. It sounded like me saying very softly, "Turn it down." Blood ran hot with panic. The thing in the radio was copying me, and it was trying to get me to interact. I finally understood what Martin meant by answers. It wasn't responding to the car. It was responding to attention. I sat completely still, gripping my phone so hard my fingers hurt. I stared straight ahead, forcing myself not to look at the radio, like ignoring it could make it fade. The static kept pushing words through, half-formed and wrong. It repeated downstairs again, then door, then my name again like punctuation. We turned onto another stretch of frontage road where the ship channel ran closer. I could see dark water through gaps in the fencing, and beyond it the orange glow of flares burning at the tops of tall stacks. The rain made everything shimmer, and the world outside looked unreal, like a set built for a movie. Static dropped suddenly for a second, and the car filled with the normal sounds of rain and tires on wet road. I exhaled, almost relieved, then the radio clicked, and a voice came through that wasn't mine. It sounded like a woman, but not clear enough to recognize. It was thin and distant, like someone talking through a wall. She said my name once, slow and careful, and then she whispered something that made my stomach flip. She whispered my address, not the full thing, but enough street name and the word basement. I felt all the air leave my lungs. My brain locked onto it like a siren. I hadn't put my exact address into the rideshare pickup, just the house number and street, but still, hearing it spoken out loud from the radio felt like being touched. I grabbed my phone and started typing to a friend without even thinking, thumbs slipping. I didn't know what to write. Something is wrong felt too vague. My driver's radio is saying my name sounded insane. I looked up and Martin was slowing down. Ahead of us, a truck had pulled onto the shoulder with hazard lights blinking and traffic was squeezing by. Martin slowed to a crawl, and for the first time since I got in, his right hand left the wheel. It hovered near the radio, not touching it, like he was afraid of getting too close. The static surged again, and the voice that sounded like mine came back, louder than before. It didn't just say my name. It said it with a tone I recognized from my own life, the tone I use when I'm annoyed, like I was scolding someone. It said in my voice, choked with static, "Hey, turn it down." I couldn't help it. I flinched forward like I was going to shut it off, because every instinct in me wanted to stop hearing myself coming out of that speaker. Martin's head snapped slightly, and his hand pulled back like he'd been burned. He said, sharper than before, "Don't touch it, don't answer it." Heart hammered. I looked at the door handle, at the rain outside, at the dark road and the fences. We were still moving, slow but moving. I was trapped in a car with a man who wouldn't touch his own radio, while a voice on that radio spoke like it knew where I slept. The static started whispering. Not words I could separate, but a low stream of sound like someone murmuring right beside my ear. I pressed my hands over my knees, forcing myself to stay still. The whispering rose and fell, and then it shaped into something clear again. "Open," it said in my voice. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from the raw pressure of fear. I didn't want to be in that car. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want the thing in the radio to know anything else about me. I wanted out right then in the rain, even if it meant standing on the side of the road. Martin must have sensed it, because he finally spoke again, still staring forward. "It started last month," he said, like he'd rehearsed it. "Same stretch of road, same weather. I thought it was just interference." The static laughed softly, and it sounded like it was enjoying being talked about. Martin's voice dropped. First time I turned the knob down, it said my name, then it kept saying it until I said "what" after that. He swallowed, and I could hear the tension in it. After that, it got interested. I wanted to tell him to pull over. I wanted to tell him to stop driving for a living if this was happening. But the more he spoke, the more the static reacted, like it was leaning in. My name came again, quicker, and the whispering grew louder. Martin took the next exit without signaling, the car gliding onto a darker side road that ran closer to the water. It wasn't a normal neighborhood street. It was service road pavement with puddles and patches lined by tall weeds and industrial fencing. There were no houses, no storefronts, no people, just orange glow in the rain and the channel somewhere beyond the dark. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I'm not taking you home," he said, "not with it like this." Static burst into a sharp, high noise that made me wince. Then through it, the woman's voice returned, thin and close. "Basement," she whispered again. "Basement, basement," chest tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. I looked out my window and saw a small pull-off area ahead, a wide patch of gravel near a locked gate. Martin slowed and pulled in, stopping the car with a soft jolt. The wipers kept moving. The rain kept falling. The radio kept whispering my life back at me. Martin sat still for a second, both hands back at 10 and 2 like he was anchoring himself. Then he reached into the cup holder and picked up a cheap pair of earbuds. He didn't put them in his ears. He held them out to me without looking. "Put these in," he said. "Don't listen." I stared at the earbuds like they were a life jacket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I plugged them into my phone and jammed them into my ears, then turned on the first thing I could find, some random video with someone talking. The sound filled my head, muffling the radio, but not fully. Static still bled through around the edges like a stain. Even with the earbuds, I could sense the radio was still doing something. Martin's face looked paler now, lit by the glow from outside. He reached slowly, finally, toward the radio, and my entire body tensed because I thought he was about to touch it. Instead, he pulled the fuse box panel under the steering wheel and yanked something free. The car's dashboard flickered. The radio went silent instantly, like someone had cut a wire. For the first time since I got in, the car felt like a normal car again. Martin exhaled hard, like he'd been holding his breath for miles. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw how tired he was. "You're going to call someone to pick you up," he said, "right now." And you're not going back to that basement tonight. I didn't argue. I didn't care how crazy it sounded anymore. I texted my coworker, the one who lived closest, and I told him I needed a ride and I couldn't explain on text. He called immediately, and I stepped out of Martin's car into the rain to talk, my heart still racing. The air smelled like wet asphalt and distant chemicals, and the orange refinery glow made the raindrops look like sparks. My coworker was annoyed at first, then heard my voice and changed. He said he'd come. I stood under the tiny edge of the gate shelter, shivering, watching Martin sit alone in his car with the engine idling. He didn't move. He didn't look at his phone. He just stared ahead like he was waiting for something to start again. When my coworker arrived, I didn't even say goodbye to Martin properly. I just got into the other car, soaking wet, and we drove away. I looked back once and saw Martin pull out behind us, then turn the opposite direction, disappearing into the rain. I didn't sleep in my basement apartment that night. I crashed on my coworker's couch, still in damp clothes, staring at the ceiling while his dog snored nearby. Every time a car passed outside, I thought I'd hear static through the wall. I kept replaying the radio in my head, the way it shaped my name, the way it said downstairs like it knew me. The next day I told myself I needed proof, something that made it feel less like a nightmare. I checked my phone and realized I'd accidentally recorded a voice memo while I was panicking in Martin's car. I must have hit the button without realizing. My hands trembled as I played it back. At first it was just muffled road noise and my own breathing. Then faintly the static came through, distant but recognizable. A few seconds later my name surfaced in the hiss, repeated over and over. Then clearer than anything else, a whisper slid through the noise, close to the phone microphone like it was leaning over my shoulder. It wasn't the woman, it wasn't my voice. It was a calm, steady voice I didn't recognize at all, and it said very softly, "You heard me." I stopped the recording so fast my finger hurt. I sat there on the couch, staring at my phone like it had become dangerous. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the dog shifting in its sleep. I told myself the voice memo could be interference, my brain filling gaps, anything. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. The rideshare app asked me to rate my trip. It showed Martin's name, the same car, the same route. Under it there was a message bubble like the driver had sent me something. I opened it, expecting some generic apology or lost item note. There was only one line. It wasn't from Martin. It read, "Don't go downstairs." Even now, months later, I still don't know which part scares me more. That something used a radio to learn my name, or that it knew exactly where I lived and acted like it had been waiting for me to listen. Around that Uber ride on Route 66 outside Kingman, Arizona, I started getting strange notifications from my security camera. The weird part was the camera wasn't even plugged in. At the time, I didn't connect those two things. I was more annoyed than scared because I'd been getting ready to leave my motel room and my phone kept buzzing with alerts that made no sense. The camera was in a moving box back home in Missouri, wrapped in a towel with the power cord tucked inside the box. I hadn't used it in months, but that night it was acting like it was watching something and it wouldn't stop trying to get my attention. I was in Kingman for a work thing that was supposed to last 2 days. My company was opening a small office out there and they flew a few of us in to help set up. Kingman isn't huge and I didn't rent a car because I figured I could just use rideshare for a couple days. That was my first mistake. When it got late and my coworkers went back to their hotel, I realized mine was on the other side of town and the streets around me were basically empty. It was just after 11 p.m. when I requested an Uber outside a bar near Andy Devine Avenue. The air had that cold desert bite to it, and the wind made the streetlights flicker. The app said the driver was 8 minutes away. I remember staring at that little car icon moving toward me, feeling impatient and tired, wishing I'd just gone back with my coworkers instead of staying out to watch the game. That's when the first security camera notification popped up again. It said motion detected, like the camera was turned on and sitting in my living room. I opened it right there on the sidewalk, expecting an error message. Instead, it loaded a blurred thumbnail that looked like a dark room. Nothing clear, just shadows. Then the app froze like it couldn't load the clip. I chalked it up to some glitch and force-closed the app. I even checked the camera list and it still showed my old camera, labeled living room, even though I'd unplugged it forever ago. I told myself it was probably just a cloud thing, maybe delayed notifications from weeks ago that finally came through. Still, it bothered me enough that I stood with my back against the building, keeping an eye on the street while I waited. A silver sedan pulled up right as the app said my ride had arrived. It looked clean enough, but the windows were darker than normal, like heavy tint. The driver rolled down his window halfway, and I saw a man who looked maybe in his mid-40s with short hair and a calm, flat expression. He smiled like he was practicing it. The app showed his name, but I'm not going to repeat it because I don't know if it was real. I got in the back seat and shut the door, and right away it felt like getting sealed into something. The car smelled like air freshener trying to cover something older. The seats were worn but spotless, and the doors had those child safety locks you don't think about unless you're dealing with them. The driver asked how my night was, and I gave the usual polite answer, already looking down at my phone to double-check the route. He pulled away smooth and slow, like he had all the time in the world. At first, it was normal. We drove through Kingman's main roads, passing quiet diners and dark storefronts. I watched the map, half listening to him make small talk about the weather and how the desert gets real quiet at night. The way he said it didn't sound like casual conversation. It sounded like a reminder. The weird part started when we turned onto a road that led out of town. The map showed we were heading toward Route 66, which wasn't the way to my motel. I figured maybe the app was rerouting because of construction, but it didn't show any alerts. I leaned forward a little and asked if there was traffic ahead. He said, "It'll be faster this way," like it was obvious. Out the window, the houses thinned out fast. The streetlights stopped. The pavement turned into that lonely two-lane stretch where you can see headlights coming from miles away. On one side was open desert, low brush, and scattered rocks. On the other side, old fences and empty lots. It felt like the kind of road you drive on in a road trip movie right before something goes wrong. I checked the app again, and the ETA was getting longer, not shorter. The route line on the map had this weird straight stretch that didn't connect to anything familiar. It looked like the app was drawing a line into nowhere. I zoomed out, thinking maybe it was just loading slowly, but it kept pointing farther away from Kingman. I tried to stay calm because I didn't want to be the paranoid guy accusing an Uber driver of kidnapping me on a Tuesday night. Still, my stomach was tight. I texted one of my coworkers a quick "heading back now" message just so someone knew I was in a ride. My phone said it sent, but it didn't show delivered. That's when I noticed my signal bars were low. A minute later, my phone buzzed again with another security camera notification. Motion detected. Same thing, same camera. I almost laughed because it was so stupid it felt unreal. I tapped it without thinking, and this time the thumbnail wasn't blurry. It was clear enough that my blood went cold. It was the inside of a car, not my living room, not my apartment. A car interior dimly lit with the outline of a headrest in the curve of a window. And in the bottom corner of the frame, I could see the side of my own face, like the picture had been taken from somewhere near my shoulder. I stared at it, trying to make it make sense. My security camera app shouldn't have been able to show anything like that. My camera was in a box back home, but the image was real and it looked like it was taken seconds ago. My thumb hovered over the screen and my heart started pounding in my throat. That's when I decided I didn't care about being polite anymore. I leaned forward and told the driver I needed to go back, that the route was wrong. He didn't even glance at the phone mount. He just kept driving and said, "It's fine." The way he said it wasn't comforting. It was final. I grabbed my phone and hit the cancel button, expecting the usual message that I'd be charged a small fee. I was ready to tell him to pull over and let me out on the shoulder if I had to. The app paused for a second, then flashed a message I had never seen before. Cancellation confirmed, route locked. For a moment, I thought I was misreading it. I blinked and stared, waiting for it to change. It didn't. The screen went dim and the map changed into a simple line with no street names, just a straight path forward like a tunnel. Then I heard it click all the doors at once. The sound was quiet, but in that sealed car it might as well have been a gunshot. I grabbed the door handle and pulled just to test it. The lock didn't budge, the driver's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. They got wet like he was relieved, like something he'd been waiting for finally happened. He exhaled through his nose, and it sounded almost like a laugh he was trying not to let out. I said his name from the app sharp and loud and told him to stop the car. He kept looking forward. His hands were steady on the wheel. After a couple seconds, he said, "It's locked now," like he was explaining a feature, like it wasn't him. Like the car was just doing what it was told. I tried calling 911, but my phone wouldn't connect. It didn't even ring. I tried again, and the screen just hung on calling before dropping back to the home screen. I hit the emergency button inside the rideshare app, but it didn't load either. My signal dropped to 1 bar, then to nothing. The only thing that still worked was my screen lighting up with those security camera notifications like little taunts. Outside, Route 66 was empty. No cars, no businesses, just darkness and the faint outline of the road stretching ahead like it went on forever. The driver took one hand off the wheel for a second and tapped something on his phone mount. Not the Uber app, something else. I saw a blank black screen with white text on it, but I couldn't read it from the back. My mind started racing through every option. Could I kick the door open? Could I climb into the front? Could I grab the steering wheel? But he wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. He was driving like we were just going somewhere normal, and that somehow made it worse. It felt controlled, planned, like he didn't need to rush. I looked around for something to use as a weapon, but it was an Uber. There wasn't anything. No loose tools, no trash, nothing. Even the floor was clean. My fingers went to the window switch by reflex, and I realized the switches were dead. The windows wouldn't go down. The lock button on my side didn't work. It was like the whole door panel was just decoration. The security camera alert buzzed again. This time I didn't tap it. I just stared at it sitting there on my screen, and I finally understood what it really was. It wasn't my security camera, not in the normal way. It was my phone being watched, and whoever was doing it wanted me to know. I pressed the power button, trying to shut my phone off completely. It restarted on its own. When it came back up, the rideshare app was still open, still showing that same straight line, still showing route locked like a warning label. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Up ahead, I saw a shape on the right side of the road. At first, it looked like a dark building sinking into the desert. As we got closer, headlights swept across old signs and broken glass. It was an abandoned service station, the kind you see in pictures of old Route 66 where the pumps are dead and the building is half collapsed. The driver slowed down like he was pulling into a normal stop. There was another car parked near the side of the building with its lights off. That's when my stomach dropped all the way. I hadn't been imagining it. This wasn't just a weird driver. There was someone else waiting. He turned in and rolled to a stop beside the building. The headlights hit the peeling paint on the wall, and for a split second I could make out faded letters and a big cracked window. The engine stayed running. The driver didn't look back at me. He just sat there, still smiling slightly like he was listening for something. Then he reached down by his seat, and I heard another mechanical sound like a latch engaging. My brain screamed at me to move, do something, anything. I grabbed the door handle again and pulled hard enough that my shoulder hurt. Nothing. I tried the other door on the opposite side by leaning across the seat. Nothing. The driver opened his door and stepped out. Cold air rushed in for a second, and I smelled dust and something like old oil from the service station. He shut the door behind him, and I heard the locks click again, like the car was making sure I stayed inside. He walked toward the trunk, and that was the first time I had even a small window of opportunity. I forced myself to breathe and looked up at the headrest in front of me. I'd seen a video once where someone escaped a car by using the metal prongs of a headrest to break a window. It sounded like a stupid internet trick, but I didn't have better options. I grabbed the headrest with both hands and yanked. At first it didn't move. My fingers slipped on the leather. I pulled again, harder, bracing my foot against the seat. It popped free with a jerking motion that almost made me slam my head into the window. I held it like a tool, the two metal rods sticking out like spikes. I didn't have time to think about how loud it would be. I jammed the metal prongs into the corner of the back window and stabbed as hard as I could. The first hit did nothing. The second hit made a sharp crack, like a tiny fracture. On the third hit, the glass exploded outward with a loud pop and a rain of small pieces. The sound was huge in that quiet desert. I didn't care. I shoved the remaining glass out with my elbow and climbed halfway through the frame, feeling the edge scrape my jacket. My feet hit the dirt outside, and I took off running without even looking back. The ground was uneven, and I almost tripped over a chunk of broken concrete, but adrenaline kept me upright. Behind me, I heard a shout. Not words, just a loud noise, like someone surprised and angry. I cut around the back of the service station, keeping low, my breath ragged and loud in my ears. The wind slapped dust against my face. My phone was still in my hand, but the screen was dim, the battery already low like it had been drained. I ducked behind a low wall of stacked cinder blocks and pressed myself into the shadow. From there, I could see the two cars. The driver was at the rear of his sedan, looking around with stiff movements. The other car's door opened, and a second person stepped out with a flashlight. The beam swept across the ground, slow and searching. I heard the driver say one clear sentence, and I'll never forget it. It shouldn't have let him out. The second person didn't answer right away. They just kept scanning with the light. When the beam passed over the broken window, it paused, like they were confirming what happened. Then the beam started moving toward the back of the building, toward me. I ran. I didn't run toward the road right away because I knew the flashlight would catch me. Instead, I ran deeper into the dark behind the station, where the ground dipped down into a shallow ditch. I crouched low and moved as quietly as I could, hearing my own breathing louder than anything else. The flashlight beam swept over the dirt above me, close enough that I could see it glowing through the weeds. I kept crawling until I couldn't hear them anymore, then I stood and sprinted toward the road. My legs felt like rubber. When I reached the shoulder, I waved my arms like a maniac at the first set of headlights I saw in the distance. It was a semi-truck, and it seemed like it took forever to reach me. The truck slowed, the driver leaned out, and I probably looked insane, covered in dust and glass, waving my phone like it was a flare. He opened his door a crack and asked what was wrong. I didn't give him the full story. I just said I'd been in trouble and needed help and that there were people back there. He didn't argue. He told me to get in, and the second my feet hit his step, I felt like I could breathe again. Up in the cab, my phone finally caught a weak signal, and I called 911. This time it rang. The dispatcher kept asking where I was, and I kept trying to explain Route 66 outside Kingman near an abandoned service station. Like that meant something specific. By the time a sheriff's car arrived, the service station was empty. No sedan, no second car, no people, just my shattered glass glittering on the dirt like proof that I hadn't imagined it. The deputy took my statement, but his face had that look people get when they're listening but not really believing. He asked if I'd been drinking. He asked if I was sure I got in the right car. He said sometimes rideshare drivers take shortcuts. When I told him about the app message, he actually chuckled once like it was a weird joke. He said he'd never heard of anything like route locked. He took down the driver info from my phone, but when I tried to pull up the trip, it didn't load. The rideshare history was blank, like I'd never requested a ride at all. I spent the rest of that night in the sheriff's office lobby, waiting for a coworker to come get me. I kept refreshing my phone like an idiot, hoping the trip would reappear. The only thing that kept showing up was those security camera notifications, still popping up every few minutes as if nothing had happened. When I got back to Missouri a few days later, I went straight to the moving box and pulled out the camera just to prove to myself it was still there. It was. The lens cap was on. The cord was wrapped up. There was no battery in it. It couldn't have been recording anything. That's when I realized the notifications weren't coming from the camera at all. They were coming from whoever had access to my account, sending fake alerts whenever they wanted. And the creepiest part was how specific they got after that night, like they were reminding me they hadn't forgotten. A week later, I woke up to a motion-detected alert at around 4:10 a.m., and the thumbnail showed my bedroom ceiling from an angle I didn't recognize. My real camera was still in a box, but the picture was unmistakably my room. My bed, my nightstand, the corner where I always throw my hoodie. I ripped through my apartment looking for hidden devices like I was in some spy movie. I checked vents, outlets, shelves, nothing. I changed every password I had and did a full reset on my phone. For a few days it stopped, and I thought maybe I'd fixed it. And one night my phone buzzed with one last alert. No thumbnail, just text. Cancellation confirmed, route locked. Even now, whenever I'm in the back seat of any car at night and I hear the locks click, I can't help thinking about that abandoned service station on Route 66, and how, for a little while, some system decided I wasn't allowed to leave. This happened while I was house-sitting for my aunt after the last train in Medicine, New Jersey. The creaking floors didn't bother me until they started following me. My aunt had gone down to Florida for 2 weeks in early fall, and she asked if I could stay at her place to keep an eye on it. She lived in a quiet neighborhood a few minutes from the Medicine train station, one of those streets where every driveway has the same tired basketball hoop and the same motion light above the garage. I was in my mid-20s, working remote, and it sounded like an easy change of pace. The only thing I didn't like was how the house felt at night, not haunted or anything, just old and too quiet. The first couple nights were normal. I'd make dinner, watch something on the living room TV, then do one last walkthrough like my aunt wanted, making sure the back door was locked and the basement door was latched. The floors creaked a lot, but that's just how older houses are, especially ones with hardwood that's been walked on for decades. It wasn't scary, just annoying, like the house complained every time you moved. I started trying to step on the same spots so it wouldn't squeal as much, like memorizing a path through a minefield. On the third night, I noticed something small that I tried not to overthink. I was brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom, and I heard a creak in the hallway, slow and spaced out like someone shifting their weight. I assumed it was the house settling, then I stepped out and the hallway was empty. I walked toward my bedroom, and a floorboard behind me creaked again, like it waited for me to move first. It happened again the next night, only clearer. I was downstairs on the couch with my laptop, and I heard the creak of the first step on the staircase, then another. I paused my video and listened, but nothing else followed, no footsteps, no thump, just that same patient sound. When I stood up, the creak happened again, but this time it came from the hallway leading to the kitchen, like it had moved. I told myself it was just the old house being old. Still, I started doing little things without thinking, like turning on more lights than I needed, or keeping my phone closer, or checking the door locks twice. My aunt had an old security system sticker on the window, but it wasn't even active anymore. The only real security was me, and I didn't like how flimsy that felt. That Friday, I took the train into the city to meet a couple friends for drinks after work. I don't go out much, and I figured it would be nice to get out of the house for a while and stop fixating on every sound. We stayed out later than I planned, and by the time I said goodbye, I was already thinking about the trip back. There's something about riding the train home at night that always feels different, like the cars are quieter and everyone's exhausted in the same way. I got off at Medicine on the last train, and when the doors closed behind me, the platform felt like it emptied out all at once. The station lights were on, but the place still felt shut down, like a mall after closing. My aunt's car was in her garage, and I hadn't driven it because she's weird about anyone touching it, so I had taken the train and planned to get a rideshare back from the station. Outside, the parking lot looked almost abandoned. A few cars were parked under the yellow lamps, and everything else was dark, the lines on the pavement barely visible. The air had that damp New Jersey smell, like wet leaves and car exhaust. I stood there for a second and listened, and it was so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights and the far-off rush of a highway. I ordered a ride and watched the little car icon on the app crawl toward me. It said the driver's name was Stan, and the car was a dark sedan. When he pulled in, he didn't stop right next to me like most drivers do. He stopped a few spaces away, then rolled forward slowly, like he was lining up the perfect spot. The windows were tinted enough that I couldn't see his face until the interior light clicked on. He was older than I expected, maybe late 40s or early 50s, with a baseball cap pulled low and a friendly smile that looked practiced. He leaned over and unlocked the passenger door before I even reached for it. "Jerome?" he asked, like he was excited to confirm it. I nodded and got in, and the car smelled like pine air freshener and something sweet like gum. He started talking immediately, the way some drivers do when they want 5 stars. He asked how my night was, if the train was packed, if I'd been in the city for work or fun. I answered with polite one-liners, still half in my own head, watching the empty lot slide past the window as he drove toward the exit. The app on my phone vibrated once, and I assumed it was just a normal notification. Then as we hit the main road, he glanced at me in the mirror and said, still smiling, "Hey, can I ask you a favor?" His tone was light, like he was about to ask me to roll the window down or give him directions. I shrugged and said, "Sure." He nodded once, and the smile faded just enough for me to notice it. "Don't talk for the rest of the ride," he said. I actually laughed because it sounded like a joke. I thought maybe he was going to say he had a headache, or he was doing some weird challenge, or he had an audiobook going, but he didn't laugh with me. He kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, like he'd just asked me to pass the salt. I said, "Wait, what?" And as soon as I started speaking, my phone buzzed again, harder this time, like a warning vibration you set for an alarm. At the same moment, the navigation voice from his dashboard cut in, clear and slightly too loud. It said, "Wait, what?" in the exact same rhythm I had just used, like it had stolen the words out of my mouth. I froze, my mouth still slightly open. Stan didn't react at all. He just drove, like nothing happened, like the GPS voice didn't just copy me perfectly. I looked at his center console, expecting to see some app open, some soundboard, something, but it was just the normal map screen with a blue route line. I tried to make sense of it the way you do when something feels wrong, but you don't want to be dramatic. Maybe it was some weird delay and my phone had picked up my voice and echoed it back. Maybe the navigation had glitched and repeated audio from somewhere, but it had said my exact words in my exact tone, and it had done it right as I spoke, not after. I looked down at my phone and the rideshare app was open like normal. No pop-ups, no messages. The only thing different was that the little help icon in the corner looked like it was pulsing faintly, like it wanted me to tap it. I didn't. I just held my phone tighter and watched the road ahead. Stan cleared his throat and said almost gently, "Just don't talk, okay? It's easier that way." He said it like he was trying to help me, like silence was the polite choice. My chest felt tight and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I wanted to ask what the hell was going on, but the memory of that vibration and the voice copying me kept my mouth shut. For about a minute the car was quiet except for the tires on the road. The route took us through familiar streets, past the closed storefronts and dark windows. It should have been comforting, recognizing where we were, but it was. Everything outside looked flat and empty, like the town had been turned off for the night and we were the only ones still moving. I couldn't help myself. I leaned forward a little and said, "Are you recording me or something?" The second my lips formed the first word, my phone buzzed, sharp and immediate. And before I could finish the sentence, the navigation voice spoke again, cutting me off with perfect timing. It said, "Are you recording me or something?" It wasn't delayed. It was early, like it knew where my sentence was going before I finished it. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I clamped my mouth shut and stared at the dashboard screen like it might show me some clue. The map didn't change. The voice didn't apologize like GPS voices do when they mishear something. It just went quiet again, as if it had done its job. Stan's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. "I asked you," he said, not angry but firm like a teacher. "Don't talk." Each word was spaced out, calm, almost patient. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do, and because the alternative was making the voice speak again. A few minutes passed and I started noticing other things. The route he was taking didn't feel wrong at first, but then we passed the turn that would normally lead straight toward my aunt's neighborhood. I watched it go by and my mind tried to catch up. Maybe the app had a faster way, maybe there was construction, but the streets got less familiar and the houses turned into darker stretches with bigger gaps between streetlights. I picked up my phone and checked the map on my end. The route line was still there, still showing an estimated arrival, but the little car icon on my screen lagged behind where we actually were, like it was struggling to keep up. The app vibrated again, even though I hadn't touched anything. This time it wasn't sharp. It was a slow, steady buzz that lasted a little too long, like it wanted my attention. On the top of my screen, a small banner appeared, like a system message. It didn't say I was in danger or anything helpful. It just said, "Enjoy your quiet ride." No emoji, no branding, no explanation. I stared at it until it faded. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't want to make it obvious. I didn't want Stan to see me dialing 911 and decide to do something worse. My friends were asleep and my aunt was in Florida. I tried to think of anyone who would answer at that hour, but my mind kept circling back to one thought. I needed to get out of the car. We turned onto a road that ran along a wooded stretch, the kind you see behind shopping centers and office parks. The trees were close to the shoulder, and the streetlights were spaced out enough to create pockets of darkness. Stan turned the radio down even though it was barely on. The quiet felt thicker, like he wanted to hear every movement I made. The navigation voice suddenly spoke again, but not with directions. It said, "I need to get out of the car." My blood went cold. I hadn't said that out loud. I hadn't even mouthed it. It was just a thought, a sentence looping in my head, and it came out of the speakers like it belonged there. I looked at Stan so fast my neck hurt, and for the first time I saw something like satisfaction in his expression, like he'd been waiting for me to notice that. I whispered without thinking, "What the?" and the phone buzzed like a slap. The navigation voice cut in instantly, saying, "What the?" in the same half-formed way, like it was mocking me. Stan let out a slow breath through his nose, almost like a chuckle, and then he said, "See, it's easier when you just listen." At that point I stopped trying to understand it and started focusing on survival. I tried to unlock the passenger door as casually as I could, just to see if it would open. The lock didn't budge. I tried again, harder, and nothing. The child lock indicator wasn't on, at least not that I could see, but the handle felt useless, like it wasn't connected to anything. I looked for the window switch and pressed it down. The window dropped maybe an inch, then stopped as if something had caught it. The night air slipped in, cold and damp. I could smell the trees and wet dirt. I pressed the switch again, and the window didn't move. Stan's voice was calm. "Don't," he said. "You're making it worse." I didn't answer. I sat back and tried to slow my breathing, because panicking wasn't going to help. My phone was still in my hand, and I could feel it vibrating in tiny pulses, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I opened the emergency section of the app without turning my screen toward him, and I saw the button for contacting support and the option to share my trip. My thumb hovered over it. The moment I touched the screen, the navigation voice spoke in a soft, almost cheerful tone. "I'm about to press the emergency button." I jerked my thumb back like the screen was hot. I didn't understand how it was doing that, but it was like every choice I made got announced before I could make it. I kept my face still, trying not to show fear, but inside I felt stripped down, like privacy wasn't even a thing anymore. We drove for what felt like too long, looping through roads that didn't connect the way they should. I caught a glimpse of a sign for an industrial park, and then a sign for a county road number I didn't recognize. My phone's signal bars flickered between 2 and 1. The app's arrival time kept changing, jumping forward and back like it was confused. Then out of nowhere, Stan turned into a small lot near what looked like a closed office building. It wasn't abandoned exactly, but the windows were dark and the parking spaces were empty. He pulled into a spot near the far edge where the light didn't reach well. The car rolled to a stop, and for a second the silence was so complete I could hear the engine ticking. He didn't turn around, he didn't threaten me. He just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, and said, "You can talk now." His tone was the same tone someone would use to say, "You can take your test now," like he was granting me permission. I didn't say anything. I was afraid the moment I spoke, the voice would do it again. I was also afraid that if I stayed silent, I'd be agreeing to whatever game he was playing. My throat felt dry, and I could taste that metallic panic taste in my mouth. The navigation voice came on by itself, low and slow. "You can talk now," it repeated, but the timing was wrong, like it was echoing him in a creepy way instead of a normal way. Then it added something that made my stomach twist, say 5 stars. I looked at Stan. His face was still mostly shadow under the brim of his cap, but I could see the corner of his mouth tighten. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was waiting. I shook my head slightly, like I hadn't heard it, like I was confused. I kept my eyes on the door handle, thinking about how fast I could move if the lock released. I didn't know if the doors would unlock if the trip ended. I didn't know if the app would even let the trip end. My phone buzzed again, and this time a message popped up inside the rideshare app chat. It was from Stan, even though he was sitting right next to me. It said, "Quiet writers get 5 stars." My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't care about being polite. I didn't care about tipping. I wanted out. I forced myself to speak anyway, voice tight. "Let me out of the car." The navigation voice spoke a second before I finished, like it was racing me. "Let me out of the car." The phone vibrated like a punishment, and the map screen flashed, then went back to normal. Stan turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his eyes in the mirror. They looked tired, but not in a normal way, more like he'd done this a lot. He sighed and reached toward the center console. For a second I thought he was going to grab something, and my whole body tensed to fight, but he just tapped the screen like he was ending the ride. I heard the locks click. Before I could think, I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the cold air. My feet hit the pavement hard, and I almost dropped my phone. I backed away from the car, keeping my eyes on him, expecting him to jump out or chase me. He didn't. He just sat there and watched. I started to run toward the main road, toward any light, any sign of another person. My lungs burned, my phone buzzed again in my hand, and I almost threw it. I glanced down, and the app showed the ride had ended. Under feedback, it had already selected 5 stars by itself. I stood there under the weak light at the edge of the lot, breathing like I'd just sprinted a mile. I tried to change the rating, but my screen wouldn't register my taps. It wasn't frozen. It just acted like my touches didn't count. Then the navigation voice came through my phone speaker, even though I wasn't in Stan's car anymore. It said clear as day, don't. I felt my skin prickle all over. I turned my phone's volume down and it still spoke, like volume didn't matter. I hit the power button to lock the screen and the voice cut off mid-breath like someone had muted it. I stared at the dark screen, waiting for it to light back up on its own. A car passed on the road and its headlights swept across the lot, revealing Stan's sedan still parked there, engine running. When the lights moved on, the sedan was gone. It didn't peel out or speed away. It just wasn't there anymore, like it had slipped into the darkness the moment I looked away. I didn't walk back to my aunt's house. I called a regular cab company, the kind with an actual dispatcher, and I waited under the brightest light I could find, shaking the whole time. When the cab arrived, I didn't speak much. I just gave the address and stared out the window, expecting every car behind us to be the same dark sedan. Back at the house, everything was lit up like a hospital. I locked the doors, shoved a chair under the knob, and kept my phone face down on the kitchen counter like it was dangerous. I didn't sleep. Every time the house creaked, my muscles tightened, and I waited for the sound to move again like before. Sometime close to 4 in the morning, when the sky outside was still black but the night felt like it was thinning, my phone vibrated once, just a single buzz. I flipped it over and saw a new notification from the rideshare app. It wasn't a receipt, it wasn't an apology. It was a message that simply said, "Thanks for staying quiet." I deleted the app right then. I shut my phone off and put it in a drawer like I could lock the whole thing away. The next day I tried to report what happened, but without the ride details, it sounded insane even to me. The support person emailed back with some canned response about driver professionalism and recommended I reinstall the app to review my trip. I never reinstalled it. I finished my aunt's house sitting with every light on and every room checked twice. The creaking floors still creaked because that's what floors do, but I stopped trying to track where the sounds came from. I stopped giving the house that much of my attention because the truth was, the scariest part of that week wasn't the old wood under my feet. It was the feeling that my own voice wasn't fully mine anymore. Even now, months later, if I'm alone in my apartment and I open any map app, sometimes I swear I hear the navigation voice breathe on the edge of the speaker, like it's waiting. And every once in a while, when I'm about to say something out loud to myself, my phone will vibrate in my pocket like a warning, as if it already knows what I'm going to say, and it wants to say it first. It was the first nursing night shift in Santa Fe I spent completely alone. I thought the silence would be peaceful, until I realized it wasn't silence at all. I used to take late-night walks during my shifts when things finally slowed down in the emergency room. Not long walks, just a short one from the staff area to the employee entrance near the ambulance bay. It was my way of shaking off the smell of antiseptic and the non-stop beeping of monitors. Most nights, Santa Fe felt quiet in that back lot, like the whole city was holding its breath. The only sounds were distant highway noise and the occasional ambulance pulling in. That community hospital wasn't huge, so the back entrance was always the same scene. Yellow security lights, a chain-link fence, the concrete curb painted red, and a small covered area where staff waited for rides. The ambulance bay was close enough that you could hear the garage door rumble if it opened. If you worked nights, you learned the rhythm of that place like a song stuck in your head. Even on calm nights, I never felt completely alone out there. I was finishing a stretch of night shifts, the kind where your body feels like it's running on fumes and vending machine coffee. I got off a little after 2 in the morning, changed out of my scrubs, and checked my phone while I walked to the back entrance. My rideshare app said a driver was 3 minutes away. I remember feeling relieved because it was cold for New Mexico, and the wind had that dry bite to it. I stood under the awning, arms folded tight, watching headlights pass on the road beyond the fence. 2 nights earlier, I'd done the same thing, standing in the same spot, waiting for a ride home. That night, a gray sedan had pulled up, nothing fancy, just clean enough that it didn't feel sketchy. What stood out was a dent in the rear bumper on the passenger side, like someone had backed into a pole and never bothered to fix it. There was also a little charm hanging from the rearview mirror, like a tiny dream catcher or something shaped like a sun. It bounced slightly every time the car moved. The driver that night had been a guy in his 30s, maybe older, with a tired face and a short beard. He didn't talk much, which I liked after hours of people yelling in pain or crying in fear. I remember his voice, though, because it was odd, flat, almost like he was reading lines he'd memorized. When he said my name to confirm the pickup, it sounded like he'd said it 1,000 times before. I got home and didn't think about him again until 2 nights later. That second night, I walked out into the cold and opened the app to check the car details. Gray sedan, same make and model as before. When it turned the corner into the employee lot, my stomach tightened because I recognized it instantly. The same dent in the rear bumper, the same little charm on the mirror, swinging with the motion of the car. It pulled up to the curb like it had done it every night of its life. At first, I felt weirdly relieved, like at least I knew what I was getting. Then the driver's face came into view under the interior light as he stopped. It wasn't the guy from before, not even close. This driver looked younger, clean-shaven, with different hair, different skin tone, different everything. If I'd passed him in the hospital hallway, I wouldn't have looked twice. I froze with my hand hovering over the door handle. I told myself it was simple. Same car, different driver. Maybe the guy let his brother use it. Maybe he shared it with a friend. People did stuff like that all the time. But my eyes kept catching details that didn't fit that calm explanation. The inside of the car was the same, too. Same faint smell, like a cheap air freshener trying to cover something old. Same small stain on the passenger seat near the scene. Same little crack in the corner of the dashboard screen. Even the radio was on the same kind of low volume, like it was meant to be background noise, not music. I opened the door slowly and sat down, keeping my phone in my hand instead of putting it in my pocket. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes stayed on me a second too long, then he spoke. "Ana Martinez," he said. My body went cold in a way the weather couldn't explain. It wasn't just that he knew my name, it was the voice. It was the exact same voice as the first driver. Same flat tone, same strange rhythm, like he was copying an audio recording. For a second, I couldn't even answer. My brain was stuck on the idea that voices didn't work like that. "Yeah," I said, and my own voice sounded small in the quiet car. "You drove me the other night, didn't you?" The driver smiled a little, like he was amused that I'd noticed something. "I drive a lot," he said, same voice, same careful, measured way of speaking. People don't usually remember. I stared at the side of his face, trying to find some clue that connected him to the first guy. Nothing matched. If anything, it felt like the more I looked, the less normal it seemed, like my eyes couldn't settle on his features, not in a blurry way. More like my brain kept sliding off the details, unable to hold them in place. I told myself to get out. I should have just said I picked the wrong ride and slammed the door. But I was tired, and I was standing in a mostly empty lot behind a hospital at 2 in the morning. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to be dramatic, so I did what tired people do. I convinced myself I was overthinking it. The car pulled away from the curb, tires crunching over loose gravel near the edge of the lot. We passed the ambulance bay doors and the chain-link fence, and then we were on the road heading toward the main streets. Santa Fe at that hour looked like a quiet movie set. Adobe buildings sat low and dark, streetlights casting that orange glow that makes everything feel unreal. My phone screen was bright in my lap, the ride map moving smoothly as if nothing was wrong. After a couple minutes, I tried to make sense of it in my head. I looked down at the app to see the driver's name and photo. That's when my stomach dropped again. The profile picture didn't match the face in front of me. In the app, the driver looked like the first guy, the one with the beard. Same tired eyes, same general shape of his face. But the person behind the wheel right now was the clean-shaven younger guy. I blinked hard and refreshed the screen with my thumb. The profile image flickered like the app was loading. For a second it was blank, then it came back with a different face entirely. A third face, different hair, different smile. The name stayed the same, but the photo wasn't holding steady. I looked up at the driver. He didn't react. He just kept driving with both hands on the wheel, radio whispering something soft and forgettable. Outside, we passed familiar streets I'd taken 100 times. St. Francis Drive in the distance. The edges of neighborhoods where porch lights were the only signs of life. I kept telling myself the app was glitching, that it was a normal tech issue, but then the driver spoke again without me saying anything. "Shift was busy," he said, like it was a statement, not a guess. I hesitated. "Yeah, 2 traumas," he said. "1 overdose, 1 kid with a broken arm." Mouth went dry. That was accurate, down to details I hadn't told anyone outside of work. I thought maybe he'd heard me talking at the entrance, but I hadn't been talking. I'd been alone, and even if he'd overheard something, the specifics felt too exact. "How do you know that?" I asked. The driver's eyes met mine in the mirror again. "I listen," he said, same flat voice. "People say more than they think." I sat back, heart thumping, and quietly shifted my phone so the screen was hidden from his view. I tapped the safety options in the app. There was a button to share the trip and one to call emergency services. My thumb hovered over it. I didn't press it yet because I was still clinging to the idea that I was being paranoid. But my gut was screaming at me, and I'd learned in the ER that you don't ignore your gut. The route took a turn that didn't make sense. Instead of heading toward my apartment the usual way, the car went off the main road and onto a quieter street. The houses got farther apart. Streetlights were fewer. The city's glow felt more distant. I looked at the map and saw the blue line had changed, like the driver had chosen a faster route. "There's construction," the driver said casually, like he'd read my mind. This way is quicker. I hadn't seen any construction signs, no cones, no flashing lights, and I'd driven that road earlier in the week. Still, I said nothing because I didn't want to provoke him. I just kept watching the map, tracking every turn like it was a lifeline. As we went deeper into the quieter area, my phone's signal dipped. The little bars in the corner dropped down, then bounced back, then dropped again. It wasn't completely dead, but it was unstable. I tried to text my coworker a simple message like, "In Uber, something feels off," but the message just sat there, not sending. My throat tightened. Felt like the city had pulled away from me, leaving me alone in this moving bubble with a stranger I couldn't explain. I finally forced myself to speak. "I think you're taking the wrong way." The driver didn't look at me. "No," he said, "this is right." His tone didn't change, but something in it made my skin prickle, like he wasn't reassuring me, like he was correcting me. I opened the app again and stared at the driver photo. It was the bearded guy again, then it flickered. Then it became the clean-shaven guy's face, finally matching the person in front of me. I felt a weird jolt of relief, and then it switched again, back to the bearded face. It was like the app couldn't decide which version of reality to display. I turned my phone sideways and started recording audio without making it obvious. I didn't know why, it was just instinct. If something happened, I wanted proof. The tiny red indicator showed it was recording, and I held my phone low, pretending I was just checking messages. The driver's voice filled the car again. "You're tired," he said. "It's hard to remember faces when you're tired." I swallowed. "I remember fine." Chuckled softly, but it didn't sound like real laughter. It sounded like the idea of laughter. "Then tell me," he said, "what was my face the other night?" I stared at the back of his head, my pulse hammering. I didn't answer. I didn't want to play his game. Outside, the road narrowed and turned into something that looked more industrial. Fewer houses, more fenced-off lots, a few warehouses with no lights on. The kind of area that felt abandoned even during the day. I could smell dust through the vents, like we were near open land. The radio faded into static for a second, and in that static I thought I heard something like breathing too close to my ear. I hit the emergency button in the app. Nothing happened. The screen froze for a second, then went back like I'd never touched it. I tried again. Same thing. My thumb pressed harder, almost angrily. The app glitched and then returned to the map. No call, no alert. Just the calm blue line leading us deeper into a place I didn't want to be. "Stop the car," I said, and I hated how shaky my voice sounded. The driver's hand stayed steady on the wheel. "Why?" he asked, still calm. "I want to get out." Finally turned his head slightly enough that I could see his profile in the dim light. His face looked normal in a way that made it worse, like it was trying to be normal. "Not here," he said. "It's not safe." That was the moment my fear turned into something sharper. Anger maybe, or panic, because he was deciding for me. He was talking to me like I was a kid, like my choices didn't matter. I reached for the door handle. The child lock was on. I yanked it again, even though I already knew. The door wouldn't open. My chest tightened so fast it felt like I couldn't get air in. I leaned forward, trying to sound calm, even though I was falling apart inside. "Turn off the child lock," I said. The driver didn't respond right away. The car slowed a little, like he was considering something. Then he spoke in that same flat voice, but the words hit me like ice water. "I didn't turn it on," he said. "You did." I froze. My hands went cold. "No, I didn't. 2 nights ago," he said. "You checked the handle. Same way, same panic. You always do the same thing." I stared at the mirror, and my own face looked back at me in pieces, broken by the angle and the darkness. I looked terrified. And behind that reflection was the driver's eyes, calm and steady, like he'd done this before. I tried my phone again, this time going straight to the normal dial pad to call 911. The screen loaded slowly. My signal dropped to almost nothing. I pressed call anyway. It rang once, then cut out. No connection, just silence. The driver took a slow breath. "You don't need to call anyone," he said. "You're almost home." I knew we were. I knew every turn between the hospital and my apartment, and this wasn't it. The air in the car felt warmer now, thick and stale, like the vents were blowing the same breath over and over. I forced myself to do the only thing I could think of. I started talking loud, like my voice could fill the space and push back the fear. "I have your plate number," I lied. "My coworkers know where I am. My location is shared." The driver didn't flinch. "No," he said softly, "it isn't." Then, without taking his hands off the wheel, he spoke again, but this time it wasn't his voice, it was mine, same pitch, same little rasp I got after a long shift, same way I said certain words too fast. He said my full name in my own voice perfectly, like he'd pulled it straight out of my throat. My whole body went numb for a second, like my brain couldn't handle it. I made a sound, half gasp, half sob, and he switched back to the other voice like nothing happened. "You see," he said, "faces, voices. They're easy, people give them away." The car slowed near a dark stretch of road where the streetlights stopped. On the right side was a tall fence, and beyond it I could see nothing but empty land. On the left was a low building with no sign, just a closed metal gate. The world outside the windows looked like a place where you could scream and nobody would hear it. I did the only thing I had left. I slammed my elbow into the window control panel and started pressing buttons at random, trying to find a way to unlock something. The driver's head snapped slightly, and in the mirror I saw irritation flicker across his face like a crack in glass. he said, and for the first time the calm tone dropped. There was something sharp underneath, something impatient. That tiny change gave me hope. If he could get irritated, if he could lose control, then maybe he wasn't all powerful. Maybe he was just a predator with a trick, not some unstoppable force. I grabbed the seatbelt and yanked it hard, trying to trigger the locking mechanism and create noise. The belt snapped back. I kicked the back of his seat once, twice, hard enough that my foot hurt. The car swerved slightly, tires scraping the edge of the road. "Stop," he barked. In that single word, his voice changed again, back into the bearded driver's voice from the first night. Same exact sound I remembered. Like he'd switched masks mid-sentence, that did it. Something in me snapped into survival mode. I leaned forward, reached between the seats, and yanked the keys out of the ignition. The car lurched and rolled for a moment, then slowed to a stop, coasting unevenly. The radio cut out. The only sound was our breathing, and mine sounded wild and broken. The driver turned his head toward me slowly. In the dim light, his face looked wrong, not scary in a monster way, but wrong like it was struggling to hold its shape. His expression shifted in tiny ways that didn't match each other, like different faces were trying to surface. His eyes stayed locked on me and they looked empty. Then very calmly he said, "Give them back." I didn't answer. I shoved the keys into my pocket and fumbled for the door again, yanking the handle. Locked, child lock still on. I felt trapped in a parked car in the dark, and it was the most helpless I'd ever felt in my life. The driver's hand moved slowly toward the center console, like he was reaching for something. My mind screamed that it was a weapon, even though I couldn't see one. I panicked and did something reckless. I hit the window switch again and again until by sheer luck my window dropped halfway. Cold air rushed in, sharp and dry. I didn't hesitate. I shoved my upper body out and screamed as loud as I could, the way we're trained to project in a chaotic "Help, call 911, my voice ripped out of me. The sound echoed off the fence in the dead building. For a second nothing happened, then headlights appeared in the distance, turning onto the road behind us. A car was coming. The driver's head snapped forward. I saw tension flood his shoulders. His hand shot to something near his seat, and at the same time my door unlocked with a loud click. I didn't wait to understand how. I threw myself out of the car, nearly falling to my knees on the gravel. I ran toward the approaching headlights, waving my arms like a maniac. The other car slowed, and I saw a woman behind the wheel, her face confused and alarmed. She cracked her window and started to say something, but I didn't even let her speak. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. I need you to call the police." Her eyes darted behind me. What happened? I turned my head, already knowing what I'd see. The gray sedan was still there, idling for a split second. Then it wasn't, not in a magical way, not in a flash. It just pulled away fast, turning off the road so quickly that its taillights disappeared into darkness like they'd been swallowed. The woman stared after it, then back at me. "Did you get a plate?" she asked. I reached into my pocket for my phone and realized my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold it. "I think so," I lied again, because the truth was I couldn't even remember it clearly now. My brain felt scrambled. Like the details were slipping away the harder I tried to grab them. The police came, but not quickly. Santa Fe isn't a big city, and at that hour the response time felt endless. When they finally showed up, they listened with that tired, polite expression I'd seen 1,000 times on patients who didn't believe they were really sick. They asked what the driver looked like. I told them, and even as I spoke, the description felt unreliable. "He looked different," I said, hearing how insane it sounded. One of the officers nodded like he was humoring me. Different how? I tried to explain the car, the dent, the charm, the app photo changing, the voice, the child lock, the way he knew things about my shift. The officer wrote some of it down, but I could tell what stuck and what didn't. The car details stuck. The rest slid right off him. They drove me home in the back of a cruiser, and I stared out the window the whole way, expecting to see that gray sedan following us with its quiet radio and swinging charm. It didn't appear. My apartment looked normal when we arrived. The officer walked me to my door, told me to report it to the rideshare company, and left. Inside, I locked every lock and sat on my couch with the lights on, phone in my hand, replaying the night in my head like I could force it to make sense. My audio recording was still running. I stopped it, saved it, and played it back immediately. At first it sounded normal, wind noise, the faint radio, my own breathing. Then I heard the driver speaking, his flat voice clear as day. Then the moment where he used my voice, except on the recording it wasn't my voice. It was my voice and his voice at the same time, layered together like two people saying the same words perfectly in sync. It made my skin crawl. I played it again and again, hoping it would change, hoping my ears were wrong. It didn't. I opened the app to report the driver. My ride history loaded and I clicked on the trip. It wasn't there, not canceled, not pending, not completed, just gone like it never happened. The last ride in my history was from 2 nights ago, the bearded driver, same gray sedan listed, same car description. Same time stamp from that night, but when I clicked on it, the receipt showed my trip ended at my apartment. At a time I knew I was still at work, I stared at that screen until my eyes burned. The date was correct. The pickup was correct. The drop-off address was correct. The time was wrong. Wrong in a way that made me feel like something had been rewriting my life in quiet little edits. I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room until the sun came up, then I called in sick for the first time in years. Later that day, I drove to the hospital myself and went straight to security. I asked if they could pull camera footage from the employee entrance for the night before. The security guy frowned and typed on his keyboard. After a minute, he shook his head. System was down, he said. We had a glitch overnight, no footage saved. I walked back out to my car with my heart sinking. Glitch, glitch, glitch. It was always a glitch. That night, I didn't use a rideshare. A coworker drove me home. I told her a watered-down version of what happened, leaving out the voice part because I couldn't bear to say it out loud. She joked about creepy drivers and told me to carry pepper spray. I nodded like that was the solution, even though I knew it wasn't. For a while, things were quiet. Days passed, then weeks. My fear dulled into something I could almost ignore. I started walking out to the employee entrance again, just out of habit, just to breathe air that didn't smell like the ER. I told myself I'd never get into another unknown car at night. I told myself I was safe if I was careful. One morning, after a long shift, I stepped outside and stood under the awning like always. The lot was empty and still. I looked at my phone, not even ordering a ride, just checking the time. Notification popped up on my screen. It said my driver had arrived. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I might throw up. I hadn't requested a ride. I hadn't even opened the app. I looked up at the curb, inches from the red-painted line. A gray sedan sat idling under the security lights. Same dent in the rear bumper, same charm hanging from the mirror, swaying gently like it was breathing. And when the driver lifted his head and met my eyes through the windshield, he smiled like we were old friends, and for just a second I couldn't tell whose face he was wearing. My roommate traveled a lot for work around the time this happened with my rideshare account. So when I heard him talking in his room at 3 a.m., I knew something was wrong. He wasn't home. I live in Columbus, Ohio. At the time I was 25, working weird hours at a call center on the east side. Our apartment was in an older brick building above a row of small businesses. We did not have a washer and dryer, so I used this 24-hour laundromat a few blocks away, on a corner with a liquor store and a closed-down pizza place. It was the kind of place that never felt fully clean, with flickering fluorescent lights and that constant mix of fabric softener and dust. I did my laundry late at night because it was usually quiet and I could take over 2 or 3 machines at once. The laundromat had these long rows of white washers and older green dryers, and in the back corner was a vending machine that never worked. The front of it was cracked, and there was a single bag of chips stuck halfway in the coil that had been there for as long as I could remember. The owner kept a small TV mounted in the corner near the front window, always playing some random cable channel with the sound turned low. I did not have a car, so I used rideshare apps for everything. To get home from work when I had the late shift, to get groceries, even to get to the laundromat when it was ice cold out. My roommate Tyler traveled a lot for his job in sales, so I spent a lot of nights alone, bouncing between work, the laundromat, and the apartment. It became a routine: throw my clothes in, sit in the hard plastic chair, scroll on my phone, call a ride when the last dryer cycle was almost done. The night this started, it was a Sunday going into Monday. Sometime around 11:45 p.m. the laundromat was almost empty. Just me and an older woman folding towels at the far table. The fluorescent lights over the front row of machines kept buzzing and flickering every few seconds, making the room feel like it was breathing. The vending machine in the corner hummed, even though the display was dead, and the card reader had a piece of tape over it that said "cash only" in faded marker. I had just moved my clothes into the dryer and sat down in one of those molded chairs along the wall. I remember opening my rideshare app without really thinking, just out of habit, to check how much the surge pricing was before I ordered a ride home. The app glitched for a second, the loading wheel spinning longer than it should have, and then it opened, but not on the usual home screen. It was on my past trips. At first, I thought I must have hit something by accident. The list of trips was longer than normal, and what caught my eye right away were the times. There were 4 or 5 trips all from the past week, all at really late hours. One was at 1:18 a.m., another at 2:41 a.m., another around almost 4 in the morning. I stared at them, trying to remember if I had gone anywhere that late. I knew I had not, because I had been at home or at work those nights. I tapped on the most recent one. It said the pickup location was my apartment building. The drop-off was an address I did not recognize on the west side of Columbus, somewhere I had never been. The total was small, like a normal ride across town, and it showed my usual payment method. For a second, I thought maybe it was a glitch, like some weird test ride the company did, but then I checked the ride before that. The one before that said the pickup was East Broad Laundromat, which was the exact place I was sitting in at that moment. The time was 3:12 a.m. the night before. I had not been at the laundromat at 3 in the morning. I had not even been awake. My brain tried to explain it away. I told myself maybe someone else with a similar name got tagged to my account, or maybe it was an old trip that got duplicated. But each ride showed my full name and profile picture, like someone had actually used my account. I backed out to the main list and scrolled further. There were more. One pickup was my job, the call center. One was a grocery store down the street that I went to at least twice a week. Every single drop-off, though, was the same exact address, same street, same house number, same West Side neighborhood. Whoever was doing this did not randomly steal my account just for rides. They were starting where I went and always ending in the same place. My first reaction was the normal one: change my password and contact support. I went into the settings, but when I tried to log out, the app froze. The screen dimmed like it does when a pop-up is about to appear, but instead of a normal message, the help chat window slid up from the bottom on its own. I had never opened it. No buttons were pressed. A typing bubble appeared for a second, and then a single message popped up: "Stop looking." I felt the hair on my arms stand up. It was such a simple phrase, but the timing hit me in the chest. I stared at the words for a few seconds, thinking it had to be some weird auto-response. Maybe I had brushed the help icon. I moved my thumb to hit the back arrow, and that was when my phone screen flickered and the front camera turned on by itself. Suddenly, my own face filled the screen. The blue-white light from the fluorescent bulbs made my skin look sick. I saw the outline of the machines behind me in the tiny frame. I was holding the phone low, so the angle was weird under my chin, but it was clearly the front camera. There were icons at the top like it was in some kind of video call, except there was no other person's face, just mine. Underneath, the chat box still sat open with that message: "Stop looking." I dropped my phone into my lap like it had burned me. My first thought was that I had a virus or I had been hacked. The idea that someone else could open my front camera without permission made my stomach twist. I covered the top of the phone with my hand out of instinct, like that would do anything. The laundromat felt suddenly too quiet. The TV in the corner went to a commercial, and the buzz of the lights over me seemed louder. The older woman had finished folding and was leaving, pushing a cart of towels through the door. When it shut, the whole place felt empty, just me and the humming machines. Outside, through the front windows, I could see the glow of the streetlights on the wet pavement and a couple of parked cars. One of them had its headlights off, but its engine running. I tried not to stare at it, but the thought lodged in my head that whoever was doing this could be sitting out there. I forced myself to pick up the phone again. The camera screen was gone now, replaced by the trip's page again. The help chat bubble in the corner had a red dot on it like there was a new message. I told myself not to open it, but of course I did. The same message stared back at me with no name above it, just support, and then the words "stop looking." There was no typing indicator, no other text, nothing else at all. I backed out of the app and held down the power button. When the shutdown screen came up, I turned the phone completely off. I remember sitting there for a full minute with the dead phone in my hands, listening to the tumbling sound of my clothes in the dryer and my own heartbeat in my ears. I told myself I would go home, get on my laptop, change my password, and delete the app forever. That was the plan. But the longer I sat there, the more I thought about those pickup locations. It was not just that someone was stealing rides. Whoever it was knew where I lived, where I worked, and where I did my laundry. The routes in the app were like a map of my routine. They were using my account like a tracker, and every route ended in the same place, at some house I had never seen on the other side of the city. When the dryer beeped, I shoved my clothes into my basket, barely folding anything. I did not even bother calling a ride. I did not want someone pulling up with my name on their screen. I carried the heavy basket down the block, checking over my shoulder at every corner. The night felt colder than it should have, and every passing car made me want to duck behind something. By the time I got back to my building, my fingers were numb from the plastic handle digging into my skin. Upstairs, I locked the apartment door, slid the chain across, and put the basket down. Tyler's room was dark, his suitcase gone. He was in Chicago that week. I went straight to my desk, turned on my laptop, and logged into my rideshare account through the website. The same trips were there. Same dates, same times, same drop-off address. I changed my password, added two-step verification, deleted my credit card, and finally deactivated the account. The company's email support got back to me the next afternoon. They apologized for the inconvenience and said they would investigate unauthorized activity. They refunded the rides, which were all small charges, and told me my account was now secure. I replied and asked how someone could have taken rides from locations that matched my exact movements. They sent back a generic response about possible GPS inconsistencies and location caching, which sounded like copy and pasted nonsense. They did not mention anything, of course, about a support chat telling me to stop looking or a camera turning on by itself. I tried to move on. I used a different rideshare app for a while, and only when I really had to. Weeks went by without anything strange happening. Then one night, about a month later, I was home alone, lying on the couch half asleep with the TV on. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up, expecting it to be a text from my boss about my schedule. Instead, it was a notification from the same rideshare company I had deactivated. The banner at the top of the screen said, "Your driver is arriving now." For a second, I thought maybe they had mixed up my number with someone else. I tapped it, and to my surprise, it opened the app. I had never reinstalled it. My stomach dropped when I saw my name at the top of the screen. Somehow I was logged fully back in. Under current trips, there was one ongoing ride. Pick up my apartment building, drop off that same west side address. The time it said the driver had arrived at my building was 11:56 p.m. It was 11:58 when I was reading it. I was home. I had not ordered a ride. My mind scrambled to find a logical reason. Maybe someone else with the same name. Maybe the driver app glitched, but under the ride details, it showed my profile picture again. My real one. The route on the map had a little car icon sitting right outside my building. I walked to the living room window and peeked between the blinds. Down on the street in front of my building, a dark sedan idled with its hazard lights blinking. I could barely see the driver, just a shape behind the wheel. It might have been any normal rideshare pickup, except I had not requested anything. As I watched, my phone buzzed again. This time it was the in-app chat with the driver. A new message came through. I told you to stop looking. I did not type anything. I slammed the blinds shut, backed away from the window, and locked my bedroom door like that would help. I called 911, my hands shaking. I told the operator that someone had hacked my rideshare account and was sitting outside my building, sending me messages. She sounded confused but calm, asked if the person had threatened me. I repeated what the message said. She said an officer could drive by the area, but there was not much they could do unless the person tried to come inside or I felt in immediate danger. While I was still on the phone, I opened the app again. The car icon on the map started moving. It drove away from my building and back onto the main road. The ride status changed from arriving to on trip. I watched as the little car followed the same route west it had always taken, like it was tracing the same pattern it had done before. A few minutes later, the status changed again. Trip completed. The officer who came never even got out of the car. He called me when he was outside and asked a couple of questions over the phone. He said it was probably a glitch or someone with my same first and last name, even though I told him the app had my photo and that the driver had messaged me directly. He recommended I uninstall the app and contact the company again. I told him I already had. He said he would note it in his report, but without a direct threat, there was not much they could act on. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. My roommate came back 2 days later and I tried to explain what had been happening. He listened, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting or misreading some bug. He cracked a joke about me being paranoid about Uber clones, then saw my face and backed off. He started locking the door more carefully at night after that, though. I noticed. A couple of weeks later was the night from the hook. Tyler was on another work trip and I was alone again. I had gone to the laundromat late, around 10:30 or so, and stayed until past midnight. The place looked the same as always, same flickering lights, same broken vending machine with that stuck bag of chips, same hum of dryers. I walked home with my basket, checked the street for any idling cars, and went straight to bed without looking at my phone once. I was proud of myself for that. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. The room was dark except for a sliver of orange light from the street lamp outside. At first, I did not know what had woken me. Then I heard it, a voice. It sounded like Tyler. It was coming from the other side of my bedroom wall, which was the wall his room shared. It was low and muffled, but I could hear the rise and fall of words, like he was having a quiet conversation. My first thought was that I had mixed up his travel schedule and he had come home early. Then I woke up enough to remember the text he had sent the day before from a hotel in Denver. There was no way he was here. I checked my phone. It was 3:03 a.m. I slipped out of bed and opened my door. The hallway was dark. I walked to Tyler's room and put my hand on the knob, hesitating for a second, then twisted it and pushed the door open. The room was empty. His bed was made the same way he had left it before his trip. His suitcase was gone. The voice I had heard was still there, though, but now it was clearer. I realized it was not coming from his room at all. It was coming through the thin wall from the apartment next door. Our neighbor must have been on a late call. It just happened to sound like Tyler when I was half asleep. I let out a breath I had not known I was holding and turned to go back to my room. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down and saw yet another notification from the rideshare company I thought I had gotten rid of. This time it was not, "Your driver is arriving." It was, "Thanks for riding with us." I felt that same cold wave pass through me as I tapped it. The app opened without asking me to log in. On the screen, it showed a completed trip. Pick up my building's address, drop off the same west side address. Trip time 3:01, trip status, passenger no-show, driver waited at pickup. There was a link to rate the driver. Under it, a little map showed a line from my street to that house, and an empty silhouette where my profile picture should have been, like they had wiped my face but kept everything else. I had been awake and at home when that trip was marked as starting, standing in the hallway listening to what I thought was my roommate's voice. No one had knocked on our door, no one had buzzed to get in. Yet, according to the app, my account had been active, my name had been given to a driver, and that driver had once again traced the same route to that same address, with or without me. I finally deleted the app for good after that and changed my phone number. I moved to a different part of the city a few months later when my lease was up. I use a different rideshare service now, on a different phone, under a slightly changed version of my name. I like to think I am harder to track. But every time I open my email and see a spam message from an unknown company, or a random app notification pops up that I do not remember turning on, I get that same feeling I had in the laundromat, sitting under those flickering lights. Because somewhere out there, there's still a list of rides with my old name on them. A neat little pattern of pickup points that were every place I spent my time, always ending at the same dark house on the west side of Columbus. I never went there, but my account did, over and over. And the part that keeps me up some nights is not wondering who lives in that house. It is wondering if there is another app on my phone right now, with trips I have never taken, and if someone is still out there watching my little dot move around a map, waiting for me to start looking again. I found a hidden folder on my laptop one morning after a strange late-night Uber ride in Lower Manhattan. When I opened it, the pictures inside showed me sleeping every single night. I need to back up because that folder is the part I still can't explain, but it only makes sense if I tell you what happened the night before. At the time I was 24, living in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn and working late shifts at a bar in the financial district. On weekends I usually took the subway home, but this was a Tuesday night that had bled into Wednesday, and I was too tired to deal with service changes and waiting alone on platforms. It was close to 1 in the morning when I clocked out, stepped onto the empty stone streets near the Battery, and ordered an Uber from my phone. The area down there at that hour feels like a movie set after everyone's gone home. The old brick buildings on Stone Street, the tall glass offices behind them, the occasional yellow cab rolling by on Water Street. The air smelled like the ocean and trash at the same time, damp and cold. My Uber pulled up in front of the bar, a dark gray Toyota Camry, and the name on the app matched the driver, Dennis. He was in his 40s maybe, clean-shaven, wearing a Yankees cap with the bill pulled low. When I opened the door, he glanced at me in the mirror and gave this small, practiced smile, like he'd been doing this for years. "You Caleb?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, buckling in, "to Brooklyn." He tapped something on his phone, the route popped up, and we pulled away from the curb. It seemed normal at first. I leaned my head back, watching the empty streets slide by, traffic lights cycling for no one. The app showed the usual route, cutting along the FDR, then over the bridge. The estimated time was maybe 20 minutes. I remember that because I was counting down to my bed. We drove past the Battery Park area, the dark outline of the harbor on my right, and I saw the signs for the tunnel up ahead. The Hugh Carey Tunnel, though a lot of people still call it the Battery Tunnel. Normally my rides go nowhere near that, but sometimes the app reroutes to avoid traffic. I wasn't really paying attention until I saw the blinker flash and felt the car drift toward an entrance ramp I didn't recognize. It was tucked just before the main approach, a low concrete opening half hidden behind a line of orange cones and a faded authorized vehicles only sign. I sat up a little. "Hey, is this a new route or something?" He didn't seem bothered at all. "Fastest way," he said calmly, eyes on the road. "Less surface traffic this way." I glanced at my phone. The little car icon was still moving, but the blue route line had vanished like the app was trying to reroute and couldn't. The estimated time disappeared too, leaving just the address in a spinning loading circle. That's when we dipped under a short overpass and onto the ramp, and my bars went from 3 to none in a second. "No service" popped up where my signal had been. I tried to tell myself it was just the tunnel interfering, like it always does, but we weren't even in the main tunnel yet. This was more like a sloping underground ramp, the kind you'd see leading down to a parking garage. The overhead lights were spaced out strangely, some bright white, some this dim yellow, throwing shadows across the windshield as we descended. I realized I hadn't seen any other cars making this turn with us. "Did they open a new entrance?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He hummed softly before he answered, like he was debating whether to reply. It was this low, tuneless hum, almost like a lullaby someone forgot the words to. "Been here a long time," he said. "People just don't notice it." The way he said that made the back of my neck tighten. I looked out my window. The walls on my side were closer now, gray concrete streaked with old water stains. Graffiti tags overlapped each other like layers of half-erased signatures. Every few yards, a metal door broke up the wall, each one with a small, square window, but the glass was so dark I couldn't see through it. I kept expecting to hit the familiar wide lanes of the actual tunnel, but the ramp just kept going down and down, curving in a way that didn't match any mental map I had of the area. Time got weird in there. I checked the dashboard clock once and it said 1:19. A while later, after what felt like more than a few minutes of silent humming and dim lights passing overhead, I checked again. It still said 1:19. I told myself I just hadn't seen the numbers change, that I was more tired than I thought, but my heart rate was picking up and my palms were getting sweaty against my jeans. My Uber app still showed the same thing, a stuck little car icon on a gray, empty space. No roads, no route, no estimated time. I tried opening maps instead. It spun for a second, then showed me a blank grid and a message about being unable to find my location. I held my phone up, twisting it like the angle was the problem, but nothing changed. No bars, no GPS. I considered asking the driver to just stop and let me out, but I couldn't picture where out even was right then. We hadn't passed a shoulder or a pull-off, just continuous walls and repeating doors. And there was something about the way he was humming that made me feel like interrupting him might be a bad idea. It had picked up a sort of pattern now, almost like he was following a tune only he could hear. I started counting the doors instead. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10, then I lost track. The spacing between them wasn't totally consistent, which bothered me more than it should have. At one point, a door went by with its window not completely blacked out. For a split second, I thought I saw movement in there, like someone walking past on the other side, matching our speed. It could have just been a reflection of our own headlights, but my brain latched onto it and wouldn't let go. Finally, I saw something ahead that looked like an opening. The darkness lightened a little, and the car began to level out instead of descending. The driver's humming got quieter, like he was slowly turning down a volume knob, and then we emerged into what should have been the traffic-choked, toll booth-lined chaos of the tunnel entrance on the Brooklyn side. But it was. There was no toll plaza, there were no other cars. We rolled out into a wide, open stretch of asphalt bordered by concrete barriers like an unfinished highway project. The overhead signs were blank green panels with no text, just hanging there uselessly. The tunnel mouth behind us looked smaller from this side, like the opening to some oversized drain pipe shoved into the wall. I turned around in my seat to look. There was no ramp like the one we had entered on, just a single dark circle cut into the concrete with no markings around it. I had this sudden, irrational thought that if we drove back into it, there wouldn't be room, that somehow it had shrunk behind us. Almost there, the driver said, as if nothing at all was wrong. "What side did we come out on?" I asked. "Is this Brooklyn?" He paused just long enough for me to notice. "It's close," he said, and pulled forward. We drove up a gradual incline, and after a few moments we merged onto what looked like a normal city street. There were traffic lights, crosswalks, parked cars. The skyline ahead was a familiar mix of low brick buildings and taller, glass-fronted ones. For a second, I let myself believe we were just near some part of Brooklyn I didn't know well, maybe Red Hook or somewhere industrial. Then the first small thing bothered me. The street signs at the corner were green like usual, but the font looked off. The letters were too skinny, the spacing slightly wrong, like a cheap knockoff version of the real thing. The name on the sign was one I recognized, but misspelled by a single letter, the way someone who had only heard it said out loud might write it. I told myself it was just some city thing, a replacement sign installed by a contractor who messed up. But the unease was already there, thrumming in my chest. We passed a deli on the corner with an awning that read open 24 hours, but the inside was dark. All the shelves were fully stocked, the coolers humming, the lights above the counter on. The only thing missing was people. No cashier, no customers, no one in the seating area. It was like they'd all stepped out at once. Every storefront we passed was like that. Lights on, displays arranged, but no movement behind the glass, no one on the sidewalks, no other cars passing us in the opposite lane. It was the middle of the night, sure, but I'd lived in New York long enough to know that middle of the night usually still comes with a background hum of life. This felt like someone had peeled that layer away and left the set pieces behind. I checked my phone again. I still had no service. The time now said 2:03 in the morning, which meant either the clock on the dashboard had been wrong or we'd been in that tunnel a lot longer than it felt. The Uber app now showed the little car icon moving again, but the streets around it weren't labeled. It was like driving through a gray patch with no names, no points of interest, nothing. "Can you just drop me at the address on file?" I said, my voice coming out thinner than I wanted. "Of course," he replied. He knew exactly where my building was supposed to be. That detail bothered me too. Maybe it shouldn't have. Uber drivers have the address right there on their screen, but in that moment it made me feel exposed. We made turn after turn through streets that looked almost right and almost wrong. Familiar chains had unfamiliar logos. A bank I recognized stood on a corner it had no business being on. I pressed my forehead to the cold window, trying to map everything in my head and failing. Then suddenly he slowed down and pulled up in front of a building that looked just like mine. Same brown brick, same stoop with 3 concrete steps, same chipped black railing. The big window of the ground floor apartment had the same crooked set of blinds I saw every day coming home. For a second, relief washed over me so strongly I almost laughed. "Here we are," he said. I looked at my phone. The trip summary had popped up, but something about it was off. There was no fare listed, just a blank space where the amount should be. The route map was a single straight line from pickup to drop-off, cutting directly across gray nothing. No roads, no tunnel, no detours, just a line through empty space. "You good?" the driver asked, turning his head slightly, but not quite looking me in the eye. "Yeah," I lied, "night." I got out, the chill in the air hitting me harder than before. As soon as I shut the door, his humming started again, louder for a moment through the glass, then fading as he pulled away. I watched his taillights until they turned a corner and vanished, half expecting the street to go dark with them. It didn't. The streetlights kept buzzing, the lit windows stayed lit. I climbed the steps to my building and pulled out my keys. They were wrapped in a familiar tangle with my bar's bottle opener, the same way always. The lock on the front door looked the same, scratched up around the keyhole. I slid the key in, turned, and felt nothing. It didn't catch. It spun halfway and then jammed like it was hitting a wall. I tried again, harder. The key wouldn't go all the way in now, like the tumblers inside didn't match anymore. I leaned back and really looked at the buzzer panel next to the door. The layout was exactly the same, little white rectangles with black printed names slid in under the buttons, but my last name wasn't there. Neither was my roommate. It was a grid of strangers I'd never seen before. My fingers were starting to shake. I pressed the button that should have been mine anyway, counting down the rows to where it would be. It rang with a thin, metallic buzz somewhere deep in the building. No one answered. I don't know how long I stood there, trying random buzzers, knocking on glass, willing someone to appear and tell me I was just drunk or at the wrong address. No one did. No heads poked out from upper windows to tell me to shut up. No neighbor coming home late brushed past me with an annoyed "excuse me." The street around me stayed still and empty. I stepped back onto the sidewalk and pulled out my phone again. No service. The time now said 2:28 in the morning. I tried dialing my roommate anyway. It rang for half a second, then cut off with a high-pitched click, like the sound system in some old movie theater. No voicemail, no error message, just silence. It was around then that I realized the city didn't sound right. There was the faint hiss of traffic somewhere far away, but up close it was dead. No sirens, no distant music, no random laughter from a bar. Even the elevators, which I usually heard in the building, were silent. Panic fully set in. I started walking. I thought maybe if I reached a main intersection I'd see something I recognized that lined up perfectly with my memory, something that would snap everything back into place. Instead, every block I walked deepened that wrongness. I'd turn onto a street where I knew there should be a bodega and there would be a laundromat instead, clean and fluorescent and totally empty. A mural I used as a landmark was there, but the artwork was different, the same colors arranged in a different pattern. At one point I saw a subway entrance up ahead and almost broke into a run. The green globes were shining, the black and white sign said the line my train was on, but when I got closer I realized the font was that same too skinny style as the street signs. The staircase was there, steep and inviting, but when I looked down the bottom disappeared into darkness too complete to be natural. No flicker of platform lights, no sound of trains, not even a draft of air. It was like the world ended 10 steps down. I didn't test it, I couldn't. Eventually I found myself near the water again, or what should have been the water. I recognized the general layout, an elevated highway above, a curved road leading toward where the tunnel entrance should be. The signs overhead were blank. Out past the railing, instead of the harbor, there was a black void that might have just been the night sky blending into the river, but felt deeper somehow. I spotted that same kind of concrete ramp we'd gone down earlier, tucked in at a weird angle under the overpass. No cones this time, no authorized vehicles, only sign. Just the mouth of a sloping tunnel, lit by those spaced-out, mismatched lights. I don't know why I decided that going back in would help, but every instinct I had told me that if there was any chance of undoing whatever had just happened, it would be through that hole in the wall. So I went down on foot. The air inside felt thicker, like breathing through a damp cloth. My footsteps echoed in a way the car's engine hadn't, bouncing off the walls and back at me slightly out of sync. It was impossible to tell if there was any incline. My legs said I was walking downhill, but my eyes disagreed. I kept going, passing those same metal doors, each with that dark little window. On one of them I thought I saw my own reflection looking back, but the angle was wrong. It was tilted like whoever was standing there was taller than me, or standing on something. I don't remember reaching the center. I don't remember turning around. There's this blank stretch in my memory, like a section of film that's been cut out. One moment I was walking, counting doors again to stop myself from freaking out, and the next I was gasping awake in my own bed in the dark, with my heart jackhammering against my ribs. It was morning light slipping around my blinds, not street lights. My phone was on the nightstand, plugged in, showing that it was 8:47 in the morning. There were no unread texts, no missed calls. I was still in my jeans and t-shirt from the night before, shoes kicked halfway under the bed like I'd just stumbled in and dropped. For a few long seconds, I convinced myself I'd had some insane nightmare after a totally normal ride home. Then I checked my Uber history. The trip was there, time-stamped as starting at 12:57 in the morning. The pickup location was correct, right outside the bar. The drop-off location, though, was not my address. It was just a set of coordinates, long strings of numbers with no street name. The map preview was that same straight line through gray nothing. The Fairfield was still blank. My hands were shaking while I made coffee. I checked the locks on my door twice, just to reassure myself that my key worked and my name was still on the mailbox. Everything in the apartment looked normal, but I felt that same wrongness, like the city from last night had left residue in my brain. I turned on my laptop to distract myself, telling myself I'd look up weird Uber glitches, maybe find some thread of people talking about tunnels or bad GPS data. As soon as my desktop loaded, a folder icon slid into existence on the right side of the screen. I thought it was a notification at first, but it settled and stayed. The folder was named in all caps, Sleep Log. I hadn't created it. I clicked it. Inside were dozens of image files, all named by date and time. The earliest one was from about 3 weeks earlier. The most recent was from that same morning, time-stamped just before 8 o'clock. Every file was roughly the same size. No thumbnails showed until I clicked one open. The first picture was of me in my bed, asleep on my side facing the wall. The angle was high, like it had been taken from near the ceiling in the corner where my walls met. The lighting matched the faint glow of the streetlights that came in through my blinds at night, soft and orange. My phone was on the nightstand in the exact spot I usually dropped it. Nothing looked off except for the fact that there was no place in my room where a camera could sit to get that angle. I flipped through the photos, my pulse climbing. Each one was from a different night, all around the same window of time between 2 and 3 in the morning. Sometimes I was on my back, sometimes on my side. In a few, my mouth was open. In some, my hair was messy in a way I recognized from just waking up. One night, I'd fallen asleep with the TV on, and the blue light washed over everything in the frame. They were all real. They were all me. About halfway through, the room changed. The bed was the same, the blanket was the same dark gray, but the lamp on the nightstand was different, a shape I've never owned with a red shade. There were picture frames on the wall above my headboard in those shots, 3 of them arranged in a neat row. I don't have anything hanging there in my apartment. In those photos, the outlet near the floor was in a slightly different place. Details you'd never notice unless you were looking for them, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. For maybe 10 nights in a row, the pictures were from that other version of my room. Then it switched back to mine, the one I recognized. The last photo is the one that keeps me up. Its timestamp put it at around 1:15 in the morning, which, according to my phone and the Uber record, was when I should have been somewhere under the East River in that ramp or tunnel or whatever it was. But the picture showed me in my bed, in my actual room, lying perfectly still on my back with my eyes open, staring straight up at where the camera must have been. The expression on my face is wrong. It's not sleepy or out of it. It's almost blank, but my eyes look like they're focusing on something far away, or maybe very, very close. There's a faint reflection of light in them that doesn't match anything in my room. Behind me in the photo, the door to my hallway is cracked open just enough to show darkness beyond. I swear I closed that door before I left for work that night. I've checked the ceiling for hidden cameras, the smoke detector, the air vent, everywhere I can think of. I've changed my locks and even switched bedrooms with my roommate. I moved the bed, rearranged the furniture just to see if anything lines up with that impossible angle. It doesn't. I've also tried to retrace the Uber route a bunch of times on the map since then. No matter how I drag or zoom, there's no ramp where we turned. The satellite view shows normal streets and the regular tunnel entrance, nothing tucked in at that angle. The coordinates from my trip history paste into the middle of the river. I still take rides sometimes when I have to, but I never sit in the back seat anymore. I sit up front, watching the road, making sure we take the routes that appear on the screen. I never let my battery die. I avoid that area near the tunnel completely. The sleep log folder is still on my laptop. New images show up now and then, not every night, but often enough that I'll catch myself staring at the corner of my ceiling before bed, wondering if something is looking down. The last one that appeared was from a few nights ago. I'm on my side, turned toward the wall, and in the narrow gap between the edge of my curtain and the window frame, there's a sliver of outside view. In that thin strip of glass, I can see the street. The buildings across from mine are there, but one of them is missing a floor. The deli on the corner has a different sign. The streetlights look taller than they should. I have no way of knowing which version of the city I'm in when I wake up now. All I know is that the night my Uber took that route that doesn't show up on any map, something else found a route to me. And judging from that folder, it's been making the trip for a lot longer than I realized.